Semantic priming is a stealth psychological mechanism that lets you guide someone's thoughts without them realizing it. It works by subtly exposing a person to certain words, images, or ideas that influence how they interpret and respond to things shortly afterward. You're not telling them what to think, you're setting the stage for they think, and they never even notice. Semantic priming how? Imagine you're having a conversation and you casually mention words like trust, honesty, or loyalty. A few minutes later, you ask someone if they believe you're being sincere. Their brain, primed with those earlier words, is more likely to lean toward believing you. They're not analyzing you objectively. They're under the spell of associations you quietly planted. This technique taps directly into the subconscious. It's like whispering to the part of the mind that never sleeps but always influences behavior. Our brains are wired for associations. Say the word doctor, and words like nurse or hospital are instantly more accessible in someone's mind. But it goes deeper. Priming can shape decisions, perceptions, and even morality. A study once showed that people exposed to words like achievement and success performed better on tests right afterward, not because they were more capable, but because the idea of winning was subtly implanted in their mental space. Manipulators use semantic priming in advertising, politics, negotiation, even relationships. You start hearing things that sound like your own thoughts, but they've been placed there. You feel seen, understood, like the person across from you gets it. But it was engineered. It's one of the most invisible and effective tricks for bending perception, because once you're primed, the choice never feels like control, it feels like your own idea. Transinduction. Transinduction is the silent puppeteer behind some of the most persuasive conversations, cult-like devotion, and manipulative influence tactics. It's not hypnosis in the stage show sense. It's far more subtle and far more dangerous. It's the art of lowering someone's critical thinking by lulling their brain into a dreamy, receptive state where resistance weakens, defenses soften, and control quietly slips from their hands. It begins with rhythm. The voice becomes slow, repetitive, almost musical. The pace of speech matches breathing patterns. Sentences loop back on themselves. Familiar phrases are reused just enough to feel soothing, safe. The listener drifts into a state where time stretches, thoughts slow, and awareness narrows, not because they're being forced, but because their mind chooses to follow. Trance isn't unconsciousness, it's ultra-focus. And when that focus is guided by someone else, it becomes a trap disguised as calm. You felt it. The way a long story pulls you in, the sound of rain against a window while someone speaks softly, the drone of a teacher's voice that makes you zone out, but everything they say still sticks. Cult leaders use it, salespeople use it, therapists use it, even abusers use it. They talk until your mind surrenders to the flow, until you're no longer listening critically, but emotionally. You feel safe, suggestible, you feel like agreeing, and the most terrifying part, you don't remember deciding anything. You just ended up there. People say yes in trances, they give up secrets, they agree to things they normally wouldn't, not because they want to, because they weren't fully there. Transinduction doesn't force, it seduces, and when done right, you won't know it's happening until it's already too late. Ambient anchoring. Ambient anchoring is the psychological technique of binding emotions to environments so that people unknowingly associate feelings with context instead of cause. It's like planting an invisible emotional landmine, except when it goes off, it doesn't hurt. It influences. You walk into a room, hear a certain song, smell a familiar scent, or feel a specific lighting. Suddenly you're trusting, nostalgic, open, vulnerable, but you don't know why. That's the hook. Ambient anchoring works in the background. Manipulators use this to shape the emotional temperature of a space without saying a word. Play warm lighting, soft instrumental music, and calming scents while you speak. You become safer, more likable, more persuasive, Or reverse it. Dim lights, heavy silence, and sterile environments can make someone feel small, judged, or exposed, perfect for control. It doesn't stop with sensory cues. Even the chair someone sits in, the color of the walls, or the hum of a fan can be used to create anchors. If a powerful emotional conversation happens in a particular setting, the emotions attached to that space. Later, being in that same space brings those feelings back. Even if nothing's happening, it creates a loop. Feel something once, revisit the place, feel it again. Abusers do this. So do politicians. So do skilled negotiators. They engineer spaces where you're primed to feel certain things: shame, trust, guilt, intimacy. Once they've anchored those feelings to a place, all they have to do is bring you back there. The room does the work. The setting becomes a trigger. You're not reacting to the person anymore. You're reacting to the atmosphere. They made you associate with emotion, and that's what makes ambient anchoring such a dangerous, elegant form of invisible control. Information overwhelm. Information overwhelm is the psychological pressure point that breaks the brain's ability to think clearly by flooding it with more data than it can process. It's not just about distraction, it's about cognitive paralysis. When done deliberately, this tactic hijacks mental bandwidth, clouds decision-making, and opens the door for blind agreement. You don't resist because you're convinced. You resist because you're exhausted. And that's exactly the point. The human brain craves clarity, but it also shuts down under excess. When someone drowns you in facts, figures, jargon, and possibilities, it creates the illusion of credibility while quietly pushing you toward compliance. You stop analyzing and start nodding. The data sounds right, the logic feels solid, but your cognitive load is maxed out, and in that moment of mental fatigue, the simplest path becomes the easiest answer: just agree. This technique is used in manipulative sales pitches, bureaucratic traps, and gaslighting relationships. Think of someone bombarding you with rapid contradictions, long-winded justifications, endless choices, or conflicting explanations. Your instinct is to understand, to solve the puzzle, but the more you try, the more drained you feel. Eventually, you stop questioning, not because the logic convinced you, but because your brain can't keep up. In arguments, this is weaponized through endless whataboutism, digressions, or relentless nitpicking. In persuasion, it's hidden in PowerPoints, technical speak, or irrelevant statistics. The real message gets buried under noise, and that's exactly what the manipulator wants. The trick isn't to inform you, it's to overload you, because when your mind is full, it can't resist, it can only surrender. Strategic pauses. Strategic pauses are a silent-shaped weapon, one of the simplest, most unnerving psychological tools used to control conversations and shift power. A well-timed pause isn't just absence of speech, it's pressure. It's space carved out to force discomfort, provoke honesty, or subtly demand submission. It hijacks the rhythm of a moment and makes silence louder than words. When someone speaks and then stops, intentionally lingering just a second too long, it triggers an almost primal anxiety in the listener. That pause feels like a void that must be filled, and 9 times out of 10, the person filling it reveals more than they should. Secrets, regrets, agreements, compliance. They pour out, not because they were ready, but because the silence demanded it. It feels unbearable. It must be broken. So you speak. In negotiations, strategic pauses make the other side feel the weight of the moment. In interrogation, they unravel defenses. In relationships, they create the illusion of disappointment, superiority, or deep thought, all without a single word. The person who pauses controls the tempo, and when you control tempo, you control outcome. You dictate who responds, who explains, who justifies. Pauses are rarely empty. They're loaded with tension. A pause after a question says, "I'm waiting for the truth." A pause after a compliment says, prove you deserve it. A pause after a rejection says, try harder. And the listener almost always complies because silence feels louder than confrontation. It's not what's said that turns the tide. It's what's not said. And once you master silence, you stop needing to push. You only need to wait. Intellectual mirroring is the psychological art of reflecting someone's mental identity back at them so convincingly that they begin to trust you, not because of who you are, but because of who they believe you are. It's not about copying thoughts. It's about matching intellectual tone, pace, depth, and language to slip into their comfort zone, undetected, like a chameleon of the mind. You mirror the way they speak. Are they concise or rambling? Do they quote studies or speak in metaphors? You match their vocabulary. Do they say data or evidence, vibe or resonance, truth or belief? You adapt not only to their level of intelligence, but to the style in which they process reality. And suddenly, without realizing it, they start seeing you as one of them, because your words sound like theirs, your reasoning flows like theirs, and your conclusions feel familiar. It creates an illusion of deep connection. This person thinks like I do. In truth, you're not revealing your mind. You're mirroring theirs, and they eat it up. It disarms defensiveness, silences skepticism, and creates a space where persuasion slides in like water through open hands. People don't argue with what sounds like themselves. They lean in, use manipulatively. Intellectual mirroring can mimic expertise, empathy, or alignment that doesn't exist. It can fake common ground in politics, relationships, or negotiations. You're not debating them, you're becoming them, just enough to earn their trust and bend it your way. And by the time they realize you weren't really thinking like them at all, their guard is down and your influence is already in. Micro-compliments. Micro-compliments are surgical strikes of praise, small, hyper-specific acknowledgments designed to disarm, endear, and influence without triggering suspicion. Unlike grand flattery, which often feels manipulative or fake, micro-compliments slip under the radar. They're so precise, so nuanced, that the target doesn't realize they're being emotionally softened, but they are, deeply. Instead of saying, "You're so smart," a micro-compliment sounds like, "I noticed how quickly you caught that subtle detail." Most people would have missed it. Instead of, "You look amazing," it becomes, "The way you match your style to the energy of the room is so intuitive." These compliments aren't loud, they're sharp, they feel earned, personal, intimate, and that's what makes them powerful. When someone receives praise tailored to something they pride themselves on, something small that they thought no one noticed, it creates a feeling of deep validation. It bypasses the ego and dives into identity. It's not about liking you, it's about feeling seen by you. And the second someone feels seen, their walls come down. Skilled manipulators use micro-compliments to build quick trust, to create artificial closeness, to blur the lines between influence and intimacy. Because once you believe someone understands and appreciates the core details of who you are, you're far more likely to trust their judgment, align with their perspective, or even crave their approval. They're addictive too. Once you hear one, you want another. It feels like connection, like chemistry, but sometimes it's a calculated move to warm your heart just enough so they can slide past your defenses without a fight. Metaaggreement. Metaaggreement is the psychological sleight of hand where someone gets you to say yes before you've even realized what you're agreeing to. It doesn't target the content of the conversation. It targets the structure, the tone, the approach. It's the agreement before the agreement. And once you've said yes to how something is framed, it becomes exponentially harder to say no to what is being said next. It begins with harmless phrases, "We both want to be fair here," or "You agree that honesty is important, right?" These aren't the real issues, but they sound reasonable, so you nod. That's the trap. That nod becomes a mental contract. You've aligned yourself with the frame. The manipulator then folds their true argument into that frame. Since honesty matters, you'll understand why I had to do it. And now, without meaning to, you're trapped in a logic you never agreed to, but can't easily escape without contradicting yourself. Meta-agreement bypasses your defenses because it doesn't feel like persuasion. It feels like shared values. You're not being pushed, you're being included. You think you're collaborating, but you're being cornered. It weaponizes consensus, turning your desire to be fair, agreeable, or rational against you. This technique is especially dangerous because it makes resistance feel like betrayal. If you reject the actual argument, you're not just disagreeing, you're going back on what you said. That guilt, that social pressure, that discomfort, it's not an accident, it's designed. Because when you say yes to the setup, the conclusion almost writes itself. And by the time you realize the terms of the agreement have changed, you've already said yes to the frame. Disqualification. Disqualification is the psychological bait and hook of influence, where someone pretends they don't want your attention, your approval, or your validation, only to make you crave giving it to them even more. It's reverse desire. Instead of pursuing you, they subtly reject you. Instead of trying to prove themselves, they act indifferent or subtly unavailable. And suddenly, you feel the pull. It works because it flips the social script. When someone withholds approval, admiration, or interest, it creates tension. Humans are wired to resolve that tension. We want balance. We want reciprocity. If someone doesn't seem to need us, we start wondering why. We start trying harder. We lean in. And that's where the control begins. Disqualification shows up in the sly remark, the backhanded compliment, the "you probably wouldn't be into someone like me anyway." It's pretending you're not qualified to win them over, to gain their trust, or to matter to them, so that you rush to prove otherwise. You want to be seen, you want to be chosen, and they never even ask. The technique is used in dating, manipulation, negotiation, and power dynamics. It signals high value while creating psychological scarcity. Someone who doesn't try to impress you becomes intriguing. Someone who isn't easily impressed becomes desirable. And the person who seems just out of reach becomes the one you try the hardest to reach. Disqualification is subtle and strategic. It's not rejection, it's the illusion of it. And that illusion triggers the need to close the gap, to win back what never truly pulled away, but only pretended to. Double bind. The double bind is a psychological trap that gives the illusion of choice while silently removing freedom. It's a manipulation masked as a question, a command dressed up as permission. The power of the double bind lies in its subtle coercion. It corners the mind into saying yes, no matter which option is chosen. Imagine being asked, "Do you want to tell me the truth now or later?" Either answer leads to confession. Or, "Would you rather apologize in person or write it down?" The decision feels personal, voluntary, but both paths lead exactly where the manipulator wants. The trick works because humans crave autonomy. We resist being controlled, but if we're offered a decision, any decision, we feel ownership, even when the outcome is rigged. This technique is widely used in sales, parenting, interrogation, and seduction. It cloaks control in the comfort of choice. Would you like to sign today or tomorrow? Are we going to solve this now, or should I talk to your boss? On the surface, you're deciding. Underneath, you're submitting. The brilliance of the double bind is that it preys on mental shortcuts. Faced with pressure, the brain doesn't analyze why both choices feel wrong. It just picks the path of least resistance. You feel like you agreed, like you cooperated, but you were guided all along. And worse, questioning the setup feels petty. "Wait, I don't accept either," sounds combative, irrational, even paranoid. So most people never question it. They comply, not because they want to, but because the trap was designed so carefully, so politely, that they didn't even see it close around them. Guilt-pleasure pairing. Guilt-pleasure pairing is the psychological act of binding indulgence to shame so deeply and subtly that a person begins to feel they need permission to enjoy anything. It's the emotional version of a leash. Give them something they desire, then make them feel wrong for wanting it. And once that pattern takes hold, you become both the source of their pleasure and the cure for their guilt. It starts innocently, a compliment after a risk, a reward after a rule is broken. But then comes the sigh, the look, the remark that stains the joy. I guess you're not worried about consequences anymore, or must be nice not to care what others think. And suddenly, the smile fades. The brain begins to associate feeling good with feeling bad. Manipulators thrive in this duality. They give approval only when they control the pleasure, and withdraw it when the target steps outside the emotional leash. The partner who flirts then criticizes, the parent who spoils then shames, the boss who praises your work, but only after reminding you how lucky you are to have the job. This creates a cycle, craving the high, fearing the consequence, and seeking comfort from the very person who caused the shame. It breaks confidence and rebuilds dependency. The more guilty you feel, the more you seek their reassurance. The more you need to justify your joy, the more permission you require. Eventually, guilt isn't an afterthought. It becomes part of the reward. You learn to hurt when you're happy, and they learn exactly how to keep you needing them, not for what they give, but for what they let you feel. Pattern interruption. Pattern interruption is the psychological act of yanking someone's mind out of autopilot, breaking their expected flow of thoughts so abruptly that their brain pauses, stutters, and opens just wide enough to accept suggestion. It's a controlled mental glitch, and it's one of the most effective ways to bypass resistance, create vulnerability, and implant influence before the mind snaps back to its defenses. We live in patterns. Social ones, emotional ones, linguistic ones. We nod when others nod, smile when they smile, follow the rhythm of a sentence, predict where things are going. But when someone suddenly changes the tempo, the subject, or the emotional tone in an unexpected way, the brain can't keep up. It freezes, recalibrates. That tiny pause, seconds or less, is a window for control. Skilled manipulators use this to reset power in conversations. A random question mid-argument, a sudden compliment during tension, an awkward pause after an aggressive statement. It's not random, it's disruption. It shocks the brain into present moment awareness, making it more suggestible, less resistant, and easier to steer. Even physical pattern breaks work. A hand gesture that doesn't match the emotion, a pause where speech should flow, a touch, a movement, a whisper when the room expects a shout. These moments confuse the norm and force re-engagement, not through logic, but through curiosity and discomfort. Pattern interruption works because it scrambles routine and wakes the subconscious. It makes people forget what they were defending, what they were thinking, what they were sure of just moments ago. And in that split-second reset, whoever controls the next move controls the conversation. Reverse proximity. Reverse proximity is the art of influence through intentional absence, the calculated withdrawal of presence, attention, or affection to create tension, longing, and psychological imbalance. It's not about how close you get, it's about how far you pull away and when. It's about making someone feel your silence louder than your words, your absence more persuasive than your presence. The human mind is wired to crave resolution. When we feel a connection begin to slip away, we instinctively move closer to restore it. This is where reverse proximity strikes. The manipulator becomes less available, less responsive, less predictable, not because they're busy, but because they want you to feel the gap, to chase, to wonder, to question what changed. Suddenly, every message they ignore feels like rejection. Every delay becomes a test. Every moment of distance starts to feel like punishment. and you don't even know what you did wrong. You just want to fix it. You want them back. But the more you reach, the more they step back, and the deeper you fall into their rhythm. This tactic builds psychological dependency. You start craving not just their attention, but the return of their attention. When they finally show up again, smiling, warm, generous, you feel relief, even gratitude. You didn't just miss them, you earned them back, and now you're invested. Now they've got you. Reverse proximity isn't about separation. It's about power through silence, control through unpredictability. It teaches you to fear the void and worship the return. And the worst part is, you start believing you're the one who drove them away. Soft framing. Soft framing is the psychological velvet glove that hides the iron fist. It's the act of wrapping manipulation, confrontation, or persuasion in warmth, reason, and politeness so that the target doesn't feel attacked. They feel guided. It's not what's being said that disarms them. It's how it's being said. And by the time they realize they've been pushed, it already feels like it was their idea. This technique thrives on gentle language, emotionally safe packaging, and the illusion of neutrality. You don't say, "You're wrong." You say, "I totally understand where you're coming from, but here's another way to look at it." You don't demand, you suggest. You don't challenge someone's beliefs. You validate them first, then slowly bend them. And it works because humans aren't designed to resist kindness. We let our guards down when something feels soft. Skilled manipulators, toxic partners, and persuasive leaders all use soft framing to rewire perception without ever sparking alarm. The tone is calm, the language is smooth. They use words like maybe, what if, or it seems like to mask certainty. They slip bias into balanced statements. They dress agendas as empathy, and they always sound like they're helping you, even when they're guiding you away from your own instincts. Soft framing doesn't provoke, it seduces. It avoids triggering defenses while still getting under the skin. And once the frame is accepted, everything said within it carries weight. You can disagree with a point, but once you agree with the frame, you've surrendered the ground. It feels cooperative, but it's control, and that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. Pacing and leading is the psychological technique of first joining someone exactly where they are, mentally, emotionally, behaviorally, then subtly guiding them toward where you want them to go. It's not domination, it's alignment. You don't pull them forward, you walk with them just long enough that when you change direction, they instinctively follow. It starts with pacing. You reflect their tone, energy, body language, values, even frustrations. You validate their experience without correcting it. If they're angry, you acknowledge it. If they speak fast, so do you. If they use specific words or metaphors, you mirror them. And in that moment, they feel deeply seen, not because you agree, but because you match. That's the seduction of pacing. It builds unspoken trust. Once the pacing creates rapport, the brain relaxes. It stops scanning for threat. It starts listening. That's when leading begins. You change your tone, your tempo, your direction, just slightly. And because they're already attuned to you, they adjust to match you. You lower your voice. They speak softer. You shift from frustration to calm. They begin to calm. You pivot the topic, and they follow without resistance. This method is used by therapists, negotiators, cult leaders, charismatic speakers. It's a dance of influence disguised as empathy. The target never feels controlled. They feel understood. But in reality, their state, their beliefs, their direction is being slowly rewritten. And they'll swear it was their own shift, because that's the power of pacing and leading. The leash is invisible, but the movement is real. Compliance via favor. Compliance via favor is a quiet manipulation that flips the law of reciprocity on its head. Instead of giving to repay kindness, you end up giving because someone gave first. A favor that seems generous becomes a psychological leash, pulling you into agreement, not out of logic, but out of guilt, pressure, and the aching human need to return what's been given. It starts small. Someone goes out of their way to help you, compliments you in public, or makes a kind gesture that feels thoughtful and unsolicited. You didn't ask, but they did it anyway. And now it's your move. Whether you realize it or not, your brain has opened a tab, a psychological debt, and the longer you wait to pay it back, the heavier it feels. The favor doesn't have to match the request. That's the beauty of this tactic. Someone buys you a coffee, then asks for a signature, helps you with a task, then asks for loyalty, defends you in a room, then asks you to betray your values in another. The shift is subtle, almost imperceptible, but the tension it creates is real, and manipulative people know exactly how to use it. You want to say no, but how can you? They were there for you. They supported you. They were good to you. And now, if you refuse, you're the selfish one. You're ungrateful. You're the bad guy. This technique doesn't force you. It obligates you. And the scariest part is, you'll often smile while you comply, not even realizing you've been cornered with kindness. Innocuous repetition. Innocuous repetition is the psychological trick of repeating key ideas, phrases, or beliefs in a way that feels natural, unthreatening, and harmless, until it's not. It seeps into the subconscious like water into soil, gradually reshaping thoughts without triggering defenses. You don't notice it happening. You don't feel pressured, but somewhere along the way, you start to believe things that were never yours to begin with. The manipulator uses soft, familiar repetition, slipping phrases into casual conversation, repeating stories with slight variations, echoing the same beliefs again and again until they become background noise. People just don't appreciate loyalty anymore. You know how I always say, trust is earned. Some people just aren't cut out for real relationships. Harmless on the surface, but repeated enough times, these phrases become anchors, quietly tying your mind to their worldview. Your brain is wired to trust what it hears frequently. Even lies, when repeated enough, start to feel like truth. This is the mechanism advertisers exploit, cults master, and gaslighters use with devastating precision. The idea is never shoved down your throat. It's simply left in every room you enter until you start carrying it with you. And the brilliance lies in its invisibility, because it doesn't feel like influence. It feels like familiarity, and familiarity feels safe. You start parroting the same lines, making decisions based on ideas you never questioned. You can't trace where they came from. You just know them. You trust them, because you've heard them so many times that they've settled into your mind like they were always there. Permission-based persuasion. Permission-based persuasion is the psychological technique of disarming resistance by asking for what you already intend to take. It's the illusion of choice, the act of giving someone the feeling of control while gently pulling the strings behind their answer. It doesn't force compliance, it invites it, and people follow, not because they were pushed, but because they were asked. The trick lies in the framing. You say, would it be okay if I shared something with you? Or, can I tell you something that might be a bit uncomfortable? You're not just softening the message, you're getting a tiny yes before the real ask even begins. And once someone says yes, even to something small, they're subtly aligning themselves with your momentum. That yes becomes a mental contract. Rejecting what comes next feels like breaking it. This technique is potent because it lowers psychological defenses. When people feel respected, they stop bracing for manipulation. The walls come down and the message walks in. Even if what follows is bold, critical, or assertive, it gets heard, not as an attack, but as an earned voice. Why? Because they let it in. Manipulators, leaders, salespeople, and abusers all use this in different ways. They don't take, they ask. They don't push, they invite. But the path was always rigged. The permission was part of the persuasion. And by asking first, they gain more power than if they had demanded it outright, because nothing feels more agreeable than something you believe you chose yourself, even when you didn't. Conversational tagging. Conversational tagging is the subtle art of attaching meaning, emotion, or judgment to someone's words by the way you respond, not by what you say, but by how you label what they just said. It's psychological judo, using their own statements as leverage to reshape their beliefs, manipulate their self-image, or steer their decisions without them noticing the shift. It happens in real time. You echo someone's thought, but twist it slightly. They say, "I don't think I'm ready for that." You reply, "That's a very cautious way to look at it." Now their words are tagged with caution, not confidence, not logic, caution. The moment becomes stained with a subtle implication that maybe they're afraid, and most people will try to correct that impression. You never challenge them, but you change the way they feel about what they just said. This trick works because we don't like having our intentions misread, especially in public, especially in relationships, especially by people whose approval we crave. When someone tags your words with a label, that's a bold take. Interesting that you'd say that. You always go straight to anger. You subconsciously start questioning whether your own behavior matches your identity. Used well, conversational tagging can guide people to reframe their thoughts, doubt their instincts, or seek validation from the tagger. They'll adjust their behavior, soften their tone, explain themselves without being asked, without knowing why. It's not interruption, it's redirection. And once your words are tagged, your next move isn't free. It's already being steered. Emotion labeling. Emotion labeling is the psychological technique of naming someone's emotional state out loud to take quiet control of how they feel and how they respond. It seems like empathy on the surface, but used strategically, it becomes a subtle steering wheel for influence. Because once you define someone's feelings for them, you don't just observe their reality, you shape it. You say, "You seem frustrated," or "It looks like you're overwhelmed," or "That must feel disappointing." And in that moment, their brain does something powerful. It slows down, it scans itself, it tries to match your words to its sensations. And if the label fits even a little, they accept it, not just passively, but internally. They feel named, and when you name someone's feelings, you become the voice of clarity in their chaos. That voice gains trust. This trick is devastatingly effective during high emotions. A person deep in anger or sadness is often unsure of what they're truly feeling. Emotion labeling offers them a framework, and they latch on to it. But here's the twist. You can use that moment not only to mirror, but to manipulate. You can label someone calm when they're agitated. You can call them uncertain when they're trying to be confident. You can plant doubt, soothe rage, or trigger guilt, all by naming an emotional state they weren't fully aware they were stepping into. Therapists use this for healing. Manipulators use it for control. Because once someone accepts the label you give their emotion, they often follow the behavior that matches it. You're not just reflecting their mind, you're quietly rewriting it. Social calibration. Social calibration is the silent intelligence of influence, the ability to read a room, track emotional shifts, and adjust your behavior in real time to keep control without appearing controlling. It's not about what you say, it's about when you say it, how you say it, and most importantly, how it lands. Masters of manipulation aren't just persuasive, they're responsive. They monitor every breath, blink, pause, and glance to measure impact like a sonar scanning for weakness. When you say something and the energy dips, they notice. When you flinch, they recalibrate. When your guard lowers, they lean in. It's an emotional chess game, one where they know your next move before you do. This isn't empathy, it's tracking, it's data gathering. Every facial tick is feedback. Every hesitation is a signal. A socially calibrated manipulator knows how to turn up warmth when you're distant and pull back when you're too close. They match your mood, then lead it. If you're skeptical, they soften. If you're excited, they amplify. You feel seen, deeply understood, even mirrored. But what you're actually feeling is precision manipulation. They've tuned themselves to your emotional frequency to become the version of themselves you're least likely to resist. This is what makes social calibration so dangerous. It feels like chemistry, like connection, but it's not. It's craft. You think you're being heard when you're really being handled, because every emotional reaction you show becomes fuel for their next move, and the better they read you, the faster you lose control without ever realizing you let go. Cognitive load exploitation. Cognitive load exploitation is the psychological manipulation of overloading the mind until it no longer questions, analyzes, or resists, because it simply can't. It's the quiet hijacking of a person's mental processing system used not to break them, but to drain them. Once someone's cognitive capacity is maxed out, they stop thinking critically, and that's when control slips in, unnoticed and unchallenged. The human brain can only juggle so many thoughts at once. It's designed to filter, simplify, survive, not to endlessly process chaos. So when someone overwhelms you with choices, contradictions, numbers, deadlines, or complex language, your mind begins to shut down its higher functions. You stop debating, you stop examining, you just want relief, you want out. And in that moment, the manipulator offers the simplest escape: agreement. This tactic is used in sales, interrogation, relationships, and even cult indoctrination. The pressure can be external: rapid questions, rapid-fire content, sensory overload, or internal, like moral confusion, emotional fatigue, or conflicting expectations. Either way, it corners the brain into submission. You don't comply because you agree. You comply because you're exhausted. Cognitive load exploitation doesn't shout. It grinds. It overwhelms slowly until logic turns into fog. It turns choice into burden. And in the fog, whoever speaks clearly, even deceptively, sounds like truth. It's not persuasion through brilliance. It's submission through fatigue. And by the time the pressure eases, the decision's already been made, and it wasn't really yours. Subconscious gesture mimicking. Subconscious gesture mimicking is one of the most disarming psychological tactics ever used, and it's almost invisible. It's the act of copying someone's physical movements, facial expressions, or posture with such subtlety that the target never notices consciously, but their subconscious feels it. And what it feels is connection, trust, and safety. What it doesn't see is control slipping quietly into the hands of the mimic. This technique hijacks the brain's mirror neuron system, the neural circuitry that lights up not just when we act, but when we observe others doing the same. It's why we wince when we see someone get hurt, why we yawn when they yawn. Our brains are wired to reflect, to connect, and manipulators exploit that by becoming your reflection. You cross your arms, they do too. You tilt your head, they mirror it seconds later. Your laugh becomes their rhythm, your energy becomes theirs, and you start to feel like you're with someone who gets you, someone on your wavelength. But it's not compatibility, it's choreography, and you're dancing to a script you didn't write. The mimic gains access to trust they didn't earn, influence they didn't justify. They become a projection of your comfort zone, and you lean in emotionally and psychologically without knowing why. The connection feels natural, but it's synthetic. Used by con artists, seducers, and elite negotiators, subconscious gesture mimicking isn't about flattery. It's about disarming resistance through imitation, so natural it's undetectable. The moment you feel like you've found your kind of person, ask yourself this: are you being reflected or are you being read? Expectation, embedding. Expectation embedding is the psychological technique of planting assumptions inside language so subtly that the target begins to behave as if those assumptions are already true. It's not about persuading someone directly. It's about slipping a belief into the background of a conversation so that it feels natural, inevitable, obvious. And once someone accepts the expectation, they begin to act in alignment with it without realizing they ever agreed. It sounds like this: when you tell me the truth later, I'll be here to listen. Not if, when, or once you're ready to take responsibility, we can move forward. The suggestion isn't up for debate. It's embedded in the structure. The listener is placed in a future where your desired outcome has already happened. Their mind skips the question of whether and moves straight to how. This tactic works because the subconscious loves shortcuts. When expectations are woven into the flow of speech, the brain accepts them as context rather than challenge. It stops defending. It starts adapting. The belief becomes an invisible frame for all future thinking, and the person being manipulated doesn't even notice. Expectations can be embedded through tone, body language, even silence. A raised eyebrow, a disappointed sigh, a confident nod after a suggestive phrase. Each one reinforces the world you're projecting, a world in which they comply, agree, confess, or change, not because you told them to, but because you spoke as if they already would. Expectation embedding doesn't force compliance. It makes compliance feel like the natural next step, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Because once the mind accepts a frame, it stops questioning the picture inside it. Delayed validation. Delayed validation is a psychological manipulation that withholds approval just long enough to make you earn it. Again and again. It's not denial. It's not rejection. It's that half-second pause after your achievement, that unread message after your confession, that lukewarm, yeah, that was decent, after you gave everything. It's subtle, controlled, and it plants a hunger for recognition so deep it starts to shape your behavior. Validation is a psychological drug. We're wired to crave it. A nod, a smile, a good job. These tiny signals tell us we're safe, accepted, worthy. But when those signals are delayed, intentionally withheld, the mind spirals. Did I do something wrong? Were they not impressed? Do they still care? And suddenly, you're not standing tall in your accomplishment. You're chasing feedback, needing it, desperate for it. This is where the manipulator steps in. They give validation only when it's useful to them. After you've tried harder, apologized more, lowered your guard. They shape you with silence, train you with unpredictability. You learn that praise must be earned again and again, but the rules are never clear. So you keep giving more and waiting. The reward does come eventually. A text, a smile, a compliment, and it feels euphoric. Not because it's big, but because it's rare, because it took so long. The longer the wait, the more power it holds. And now you're hooked, because every time they pull back, you chase. Every time they withhold, you perform. You're not just wanting validation anymore. You're working for it, on their terms. Intentional misinterpretation. Intentional misinterpretation is the psychological trick of pretending not to understand someone accurately, twisting their words just enough to shift control of the conversation in your favor. It's not overt distortion. It's subtle, strategic. A smile and a casual, "Oh, so what you're saying is," followed by a version of their point that favors you. And the second they don't correct you, the narrative sticks. It creates an immediate dilemma for the other person. Correct you and risk sounding defensive, or let it slide and let your version of reality take root. Most let it slide. That's the trap. What started as their truth becomes your interpretation. Now you own the frame, and once you own the frame, you own the outcome. Manipulators use this in arguments, negotiations, and guilt trips. A partner says, "I need more space," and the response is, "So you're saying I'm smothering you?" Flipping a neutral statement into a personal attack. The original message gets buried under the emotional reaction the manipulator manufactured. This tactic works because it drags the conversation into your territory. It turns logic into confusion, vulnerability into guilt, disagreement into offense. And if done with charm or feigned innocence, it can make the target feel like they're the one who misunderstood. The danger lies in its subtlety. It's not loud, it's not obvious. It's disguised as interpretation, curiosity, even kindness, but it poisons the truth and reshapes it into something more controllable, something that benefits the manipulator, something they can win. And once your words are no longer your own, you begin defending things you never said and losing battles you never chose. Identity binding. Identity binding is the psychological sleight of hand that fuses someone's self-worth to a belief, behavior, or role so tightly that to question the behavior feels like questioning who they are. It doesn't manipulate action directly. It manipulates identity. And once your identity is entangled in someone else's narrative, you'll do almost anything to protect it, even if it's destroying you. The manipulator doesn't ask, "Will you help me?" They say, "You're the kind of person who always comes through." They don't suggest, "Try again." They whisper, "That's not like you to give up." It sounds like encouragement, support, but it's a trap lined with flattery, because now your behavior isn't just a choice, it's a reflection of who you are and who wants to betray themselves. This technique works because humans are wired to defend their identity more fiercely than almost anything else. Tell someone they're smart, kind, or dependable, and they'll bend over backwards to stay that way, even when it hurts, even when they're being used. The real genius of identity binding is how invisible it feels. It shows up in phrases like, "You're better than that," "You're not a quitter," "You're always the strong one." It feels like belief in you, but it's actually control over you. The behavior isn't being judged, you are. So now, saying no isn't just a decision, it's a betrayal of the person you're supposed to be. And that's how it takes hold. You don't obey because you're weak. You obey because you've been convinced that doing anything else would mean you're no longer you. Fake vulnerability. Fake vulnerability is the psychological manipulation of exposing carefully selected flaws or emotional confessions not to build trust, but to buy it. It's a performance of authenticity, a masquerade of openness designed to disarm you, draw you in, and lower your guard. It doesn't reveal weakness. It uses the illusion of weakness as a weapon. It starts with something raw enough to feel real, but safe enough to control. A story of childhood pain, a failed relationship, a self-deprecating joke. The manipulator sprinkles in emotion, just enough tremble in the voice, just enough pause between words to make it feel like truth. And you, being human, soften. You lean in. You want to be the one who understands them, who sees past the walls. You think you're witnessing a rare glimpse of their soul, but you're not. You're witnessing strategy. The goal isn't to connect, it's to invert the power dynamic. When someone shows vulnerability first, it compels the other to respond in kind. You start opening up, sharing more, trusting deeper, but their vulnerability was rehearsed, curated, weaponized. Yours isn't. The imbalance begins. Fake vulnerability creates emotional debt. I told you something personal. Now you owe me empathy, loyalty, secrecy. It creates a fast-tracked bond that feels intimate but was manufactured. And once you're invested in the illusion, you start justifying their behavior, forgiving their red flags, defending their intentions, because you feel like you know them. But you don't. You only know the character they played. And by the time you realize the tears weren't real, the damage already is. Anticipated agreement. Anticipated agreement is the psychological trick of speaking as if someone already agrees with you, before they've had a chance to think, object, or even pause. It bypasses resistance by framing consent as a given, not a choice. The pressure isn't loud, it's casual, and that's what makes it so dangerous. It feels like conversation, but it's actually consent in disguise. The manipulator doesn't ask, "Do you agree with me?" They say, "Of course you already know this." Or, "As we've both seen, the only real option is." They speak your decision into existence before you've had a moment to form it. And now, to disagree isn't just difficult, it's awkward. It interrupts the flow. It breaks rapport. It feels like being the one who didn't get it. This technique plays on our deep desire to belong and be seen as reasonable. When someone speaks as though we share their belief, we feel an unspoken pressure to live up to that assumption. We don't want to be the difficult one. We don't want to be the outsider. So we nod, we agree, even if it's not what we really feel. Anticipated agreement is most powerful when wrapped in confidence and familiarity. It disarms logic because it doesn't sound like persuasion. It sounds like fact. It sounds like something you already believe, something you should have known all along. And the moment you go along with it, even slightly, it creates a feedback loop. Now, they're not just assuming your agreement, they're referring to it. Since you said it made sense earlier, you've been enrolled without permission, and silence becomes surrender. Silent pressure. Silent pressure is the psychological force that doesn't speak, but screams through presence. It's the heavy pause after a question, the stare that lingers just a second too long, the breath held back in calculated stillness. It creates tension so palpable, so unbearable, that the other person starts talking just to make it stop. And in doing so, they surrender power. Words aren't needed. In fact, they'd ruin it. This tactic thrives in the void, in the vacuum between expectation and response. Someone asks for something and then says nothing. They wait. They hover. The silence stretches. Suddenly, the brain fills in the blanks. Did I say the wrong thing? Are they disappointed? Should I give more? And to escape the discomfort, you rush to fix it, even when you don't have to. Manipulators use silent pressure to extract confessions, escalate guilt, and gain the upper hand in negotiations or emotional disputes. The silence itself becomes a weapon, demanding explanation, justification, or surrender. And because the tension is internal, the victim doesn't always realize they're being coerced. They just want relief, and they'll trade honesty, boundaries, or even dignity to get it. It's terrifyingly effective in relationships, where emotional stakes are high and validation is craved. A partner who withdraws mid-argument, a parent who stares silently after hearing your decision, a friend who says, "It's fine," and then says nothing else. You're left scrambling in the dark, trying to prove something, fix something, earn something. But they already got what they wanted. They didn't need to argue. They just needed you to fill the silence with your own undoing. Induced self-blame. Induced self-blame is a psychological weapon that flips the spotlight from the manipulator to the manipulated, forcing you to carry the guilt for things they caused. It's not just misdirection, it's emotional inversion. They create the wound, then hand you the knife and ask why you're bleeding, and somewhere inside, you believe them. This tactic begins subtly, a raised eyebrow, a passive-aggressive joke, a sigh that says more than words ever could. You ask what's wrong and they say, "Nothing, I just didn't expect this from you." Or, "I guess I overestimated how much you cared." You begin replaying everything, doubting yourself, apologizing, not for what you did, but for what they made you feel like you did. They twist your natural empathy into a leash. The more you care, the more it tightens. They reframe your boundaries as cruelty. Your exhaustion becomes abandonment. Your logic becomes aggression. And suddenly, you're apologizing for things you didn't even do, just to stop the emotional storm they've unleashed. The genius of induced self-blame is that it doesn't require yelling or threats. It just needs your conscience, your need to be good, to be kind, to be enough. and manipulators know how to exploit that. They paint themselves as the hurt party, the misunderstood victim, the one who only ever wanted love, but somehow keeps getting pushed away. You start changing your behavior, not because it's wrong, but because you're terrified of hurting them again. Even though they're the one pulling every string, they never take the blame. They just make sure you carry it, all of it, quietly, willingly, until you can't even tell which part of the pain is yours anymore. Anchored apology is the psychological tactic of embedding control, blame, or manipulation inside an apology, turning what should be an act of humility into a subtle act of domination. It looks like remorse on the outside, but it's wired with strategic messaging that deflects, reframes, or justifies. The words say, "I'm sorry," but the subtext says, "I'm still in control." It starts with structure. "I'm sorry you feel that way" doesn't take ownership. It pins your emotions as the problem. "I'm sorry, but you made me react like that" wraps a confession around an accusation. It doesn't soothe, it sharpens. The apology becomes a delivery system for control, soft enough to sound sincere, sharp enough to twist perception. Anchored apologies confuse the target. On the surface, they're being acknowledged, but underneath, they're being repositioned. They begin to question if maybe they were overreacting. Maybe they did cause the situation. Maybe this version of the truth is more balanced. And just like that, the manipulator reframes the narrative under the illusion of making peace. This tactic is lethal in relationships, romantic, parental, professional, anywhere where guilt can be weaponized. It traps the receiver in a bind. If you reject the apology, you seem unforgiving. If you accept it, you accept the anchor that came with it. The hidden message, the blame shift, the rewrite. Anchored apology isn't about healing. It's about control. It's a handshake with a knife hidden in the palm. You hear, "I'm sorry," but you feel doubt, shame, submission. And that's how they win, by turning your need for closure into another way to stay above you. Presumptive framing. Presumptive framing is the psychological maneuver of speaking in a way that assumes your outcome is already agreed upon, before permission is given, before consent is earned, before a decision is made. It doesn't argue, it doesn't ask, it presumes, and in doing so, it traps the listener in a framework where saying no feels like contradiction, confrontation, or disruption. A manipulator won't say, "Would you like to help me?" They say, "Thanks for stepping in. I knew I could count on you." They won't say, "Can we talk about this later?" They say, "So when we meet tomorrow to wrap this up?" The outcome is already baked into the language, and most people go along without realizing they were never actually given a choice. This trick works because it appeals to politeness, to momentum, to the deep discomfort most people feel when correcting someone mid-sentence. It leverages your unwillingness to make things awkward. It counts on your instinct to avoid friction. So you smile, you nod, you comply, because the alternative is to challenge a reality that's already been laid out like a script you didn't write. Presumptive framing isn't just about confidence, it's about dominance disguised as familiarity. It ropes you in with casual certainty, and once you're inside the frame, everything you say or do feels like confirmation. You weren't manipulated, you just went along with it. But in truth, your consent was never invited. It was fabricated. And by the time you realize it, the conversation's already moved on, as if you agreed from the start. Self-image manipulation. Self-image manipulation is the psychological act of reshaping how someone sees themselves, not by direct insult or praise, but by subtle, repeated framing that shifts their identity from the inside out. It's not about controlling behavior. It's about rewriting who you believe you are and then letting that new identity control you. This tactic starts quietly, a passing comment, a raised eyebrow, a carefully chosen compliment, followed by a hidden jab. "You've always been the responsible one. You're such a mess when you get emotional. You're not like those dramatic types, right? These phrases aren't just observations, they're definitions. Each one is a thread, and over time, they stitch together an identity, one they chose for you. And once you begin to internalize it, you start living through it. You act responsible even when you're exhausted. You suppress emotions because you're not like that. You question your own reactions because they don't align with the version of you they've created. The cage isn't visible, it's made of mirrors. You see yourself through their words, their tone, their patterns, and eventually you stop recognizing who you were before. This form of manipulation is devastating because it doesn't force you. It makes you comply with yourself. You correct your own behavior, edit your own emotions, silence your own needs, not because they said to, but because you believe it's who you are. They don't need to control your choices. They just need to control the person you think you are when you make them. And once that happens, you're not just following their rules, you're becoming the version of yourself that serves their story. Mood contagion. Mood contagion is the invisible virus of emotion, an unspoken, unconscious force that transfers one person's emotional state directly into another's. It's not conversation, it's atmosphere. One sigh, one glance, one carefully timed silence can infect a room with tension, guilt, joy, or dread. And the person who controls the mood controls the people in it. We are biologically wired to synchronize with others. Our mirror neurons fire when we see someone smile, frown, tremble, or light up. We feel what they feel, often before we process why. And this is where mood contagion becomes a weapon. Manipulators walk into a room heavy with stress or buzzing with confidence, not because they feel it, but because they want you to. Your body sinks, your guard shifts, you align without knowing it. A person seething with quiet anger doesn't have to raise their voice. Their presence alone tightens your chest. A partner oozing disappointment doesn't need to say a word. You already feel like you failed. You adjust, apologize, tiptoe around their emotions, trying to fix what they never said was broken. And when they bring joy, warmth, energy, it's intoxicating. You crave it. You seek them out, hoping for another dose of the high they made you feel. That's the hook. Your emotional state no longer feels like yours. It's tied to them, controlled by them. The manipulator becomes your emotional thermostat. They decide if you're up, down, calm, panicked, and you don't realize it's happening because mood contagion doesn't ask permission. It just spreads until one day you feel off balance and don't know why, only to look up and see them smiling or not. Gratitude guilt trap. The gratitude guilt trap is a psychological ambush that turns thankfulness into a leash, one lined with pressure, silence, and invisible obligation. It's the manipulation of giving not to be kind, but to own. The gift isn't the point, the guilt is, because once you've received something you didn't ask for, you're no longer free, you're indebted. It starts with generosity, a favor, a gift, a sacrifice that feels meaningful. I did this for you. I put you first. I gave up so much, and in return, they want nothing, or so it seems, until the moment you set a boundary, say no, pull away, then comes the weight. After everything I've done for you? Wow, so this is how you repay me? You're not being judged on your actions. You're being judged for your gratitude, or lack of it. This trap is especially cruel because it preys on the kind-hearted, the empathetic, the ones who already carry guilt like skin. The manipulator gives just enough to claim moral high ground, then holds it hostage. You don't want to feel ungrateful. You don't want to look selfish. So you compromise. You give in, not because it's right, but because it would feel wrong not to. The brilliance of this tactic is that it makes resistance look heartless. You're not rejecting a demand. You're rejecting someone who loved you. And soon you start doing things you don't want to do, not out of fear, but out of shame. Not because you owe them, but because they made you feel like you should. And the more you thank them, the tighter the trap becomes. Urgency creation. Urgency creation is the psychological accelerator that shuts down critical thinking by making you believe time is your enemy. It manufactures pressure, inflates stakes, and lights a mental fire under your feet, all to force a decision now. Not because it's the right time, but because it's their time. And when urgency takes hold, control slips right through your hands. You see it in high-pressure sales. This offer expires in 10 minutes. You hear it in emotional ultimatums. If you don't decide tonight, I'm walking away. It's not just about rushing. It's about collapsing your ability to think clearly. The manipulator frames waiting as dangerous, hesitation as weakness, and reflection as betrayal. They hijack your instincts, flooding you with anxiety dressed up as decisiveness. Under urgency, the brain doesn't weigh logic. It reacts. It narrows in. Fight, flight, freeze, or comply. And compliance becomes the path of least resistance. You're pushed to make a choice not because it feels right, but because the clock is ticking, even if the clock isn't real. This tactic is devastating because it creates false scarcity of time, opportunity, affection, forgiveness. I won't ask again. They're almost sold out. This is your only chance. It corners you, forces you into movement, and rewards your panic with fleeting relief. And once you say yes under pressure, they have you. Urgency doesn't make a situation urgent. It makes you feel like it is. And that feeling is enough to steal your clarity, your boundaries, and your choice before you even realize you've been rushed into surrender. Comparative belittling. Comparative belittling is the psychological blade that doesn't strike directly. It cuts by comparison. It's the quiet erosion of your confidence through constant, calculated references to someone better, stronger, smarter, or simply more. The pain doesn't come from insults. It comes from the implication that you're not enough, and worse, that someone else already is. It sounds harmless at first. She handled that way better than you did. He never complains like that. You should have seen how quickly he solved it. These comments don't scream cruelty. They whisper inadequacy. They place you side by side with an invisible competitor and let your own mind do the damage. And that's the brilliance of the trap. You start belittling yourself for them. Over time, these comparisons become a pattern, always stacking someone else higher. A friend, an ex, a coworker, even a stranger. The message is never screamed, but always clear. They are more, so you must be less. And you begin trying to catch up, trying to prove your worth, trying to be better, even when you're already bleeding from the climb. Comparative belittling doesn't motivate. It starves. It turns love into a scoreboard, presence into performance, and identity into a losing game. The person using it knows what they're doing. They dangle admiration just out of reach, forcing you to jump higher, try harder, shrink smaller, while they say, I'm just being honest. And the cruelest part? You start comparing yourself, even when they're not around, because they've taught you that you're never quite enough, not until you become someone else. Strategic forgetfulness. Strategic forgetfulness is the calculated act of forgetting key details, promises, or conversations to dodge accountability, rewrite reality, and manipulate control while appearing innocent, distracted, or simply human. It's not memory failure. It's power disguised as absent-mindedness, and it leaves you confused, doubting yourself, and constantly working harder to hold things together that they keep letting slip. They forget the thing you asked them not to say, the agreement they swore they'd honor, the date you set weeks ago, the hurtful comment they made without meaning to, and when you bring it up, they act baffled, even hurt. I don't remember saying that. I must have misunderstood. Or worse, are you sure you told me that? And just like that, the ground beneath you starts to shift. You begin to question your memory, your tone, your expectations. Did you say it wrong? Did you overreact? Are you being unfair? And this is where the real control begins, not in what they forget, but in what it makes you remember, how often you end up explaining, reminding, justifying, cleaning up the pieces they casually drop without consequence. Strategic forgetfulness rewrites the past in real time. It erases their responsibility and stains your credibility. They forget what's convenient to forget, especially when accountability looms. And when repeated enough, it sends a message loud and clear. If something matters, you better hold on to it, because they won't, or at least they'll say they didn't. It keeps you working harder, feeling smaller, doubting deeper, and over time, you stop expecting follow-through at all. You just try to prevent the next thing they'll pretend never happened. False equivalence. False equivalence is a psychological distortion that makes two completely different things seem equal, twisting logic, shrinking guilt, and reshaping truth until reality itself becomes negotiable. It's the manipulator's favorite smokescreen. Blur the lines just enough so that your pain looks petty, your reaction looks extreme, and their actions look justified. They don't defend what they did, they compare it. So I lied once, but you forgot to text me back last week. You raised your voice. How is that any better than me walking away? It's not an apology. It's a deflection wrapped in balance. The goal isn't fairness, it's confusion, doubt, making you question your instincts and shrink your boundaries because maybe they have a point. False equivalence thrives on emotional imbalance. The manipulator knows your empathy will seek harmony, so they weaponize your desire to be fair by comparing their betrayal to your reaction, their manipulation to your frustration, their abuse to your exhaustion, and suddenly you're apologizing for crying, for yelling, for being hurt. The brilliance of this tactic is in its symmetry. It feels logical. Two sides, two wrongs, but the weights are never equal. One person swings an axe, the other winces, and somehow both are blamed. Once you accept the false equivalence, you start policing yourself harder than you ever questioned them. You start taking equal responsibility for unequal harm, and they keep doing it because they know all they need to escape accountability is to make your truth look just as ugly as their lie. Emotional rehearsal. Emotional rehearsal is the psychological trick of making someone feel an experience before it ever happens, so deeply, so vividly, that their body reacts as if it's real. It's not just imagination, it's mental conditioning. The manipulator walks you through a scenario, not to inform you, but to shape your future decision by flooding your nervous system with emotional consequences that haven't even occurred. They don't say, "You might regret this." They say, "Imagine how empty it's going to feel when you realize I'm not there next time you need me." They don't warn you. They walk you through it, step by step, word by word, until your heart races, your stomach twists, and your emotions blur the line between fantasy and memory. The power of emotional rehearsal lies in how the brain processes imagined scenarios. It fires up the same circuits as real ones. That means you feel the loss, the failure, the isolation, even if it hasn't happened. And that feeling becomes a warning signal, a ghost of pain, urging you to avoid the path that leads there. The manipulator knows this. They build your fear before the choice is even on the table. Used in toxic relationships, cult indoctrination, and aggressive persuasion, emotional rehearsal becomes a tool of preloaded compliance. You don't want to disobey because you've already felt the punishment. You don't want to walk away because you've already suffered the imagined consequence. And worst of all, you think the fear is yours, but it was scripted, rehearsed, planted. So when the real moment comes, you flinch exactly the way they prepared you to. Future pacing. Future pacing is the psychological technique that skips the present altogether and speaks directly to your future self, pulling you into a mental simulation where the outcome is already decided and you're already on board. It doesn't ask you to make a decision. It assumes you already have. It paints a picture so vivid, so emotionally charged, that your subconscious starts living it before you've even agreed. The manipulator doesn't say, "If you decide to join me," they say, "When we're sitting there together, celebrating how far we've come." They don't suggest, "Maybe one day you'll see." They declare, "You'll remember this moment as the turning point." You haven't committed. You haven't even said yes. But the way they frame the future drags you toward it, and your mind begins to fill in the gaps. This trick works because the brain is deeply influenced by visualization. When someone paints a future for you, rich with emotion, reward, success, or even escape, it bypasses logic. It feels real. It feels inevitable. And saying no suddenly feels like not just resisting them, but betraying your own future. Future pacing is used in seduction, cult recruitment, high-pressure sales, and toxic relationships. It creates emotional momentum. You start imagining what it would feel like, look like, mean to become part of that vision. And by the time you realize you're still standing in the present, you've already started investing in the fantasy. You didn't say yes, but you pictured it, felt it, wanted it. And now, turning back doesn't just feel like rejection, it feels like loss, like giving up something you never actually had, but already miss. Preemptive blame removal. Preemptive blame removal is the psychological tactic of disarming confrontation before it even begins, by framing oneself as misunderstood, innocent, or unfairly judged before being held accountable. It's not defense. It's offense disguised as vulnerability, and it twists your instincts, making you feel guilty for even thinking about holding them responsible. They don't wait to be called out. They jump in first. "I know this is going to make me look like the bad guy," or "You're probably going to think I'm being selfish," but in those moments, they've already set the terms of the conversation. The guilt is pre-positioned, and your anger, your truth, gets buried under the weight of their emotional disclaimer. You want to speak up, but now you feel petty, critical, harsh, because they already know they might be wrong. They've already apologized, sort of. They've painted themselves as someone misunderstood, someone trying their best. And by doing so, they rob you of your right to confront them without looking like the problem. This tactic is subtle, often delivered with a sigh, a downcast glance, or a soft tone that says, "Please don't make this harder than it already is." But what it's really doing is flipping the frame. It's not about what they did. It's about how bad they already feel for doing it. So you back off, you console, you forgive before they even ask. And that's the goal. Not to take responsibility, but to escape it. Not to repair damage, but to soften your judgment long enough for them to avoid the full weight of truth. Because if you hesitate, if you minimize, if you hold back, they win. And they know exactly how to make you do it. Hypernormalization. Hypernormalization is the psychological descent into distorted reality, where dysfunction is presented so frequently, so confidently, and so universally that it begins to feel normal. It's not about hiding chaos. It's about flooding your world with it until your brain stops resisting and starts adapting, until wrong feels familiar, until confusion feels safe. This tactic doesn't deny the madness. It amplifies it, overwhelms you with contradictions. Today, the rules are one way. Tomorrow, they flip. Promises are made and broken without consequence. Lies are told in the open, and no one blinks. You ask questions, and you're met with shrugs. You push back, and you're told, "That's just how it is." And slowly, your sense of truth begins to erode. Hypernormalization is psychological erosion. At first, the inconsistencies scream at you, but over time, your brain, desperate for stability, starts rewriting itself to survive. You stop looking for fairness. You stop trusting your memory. You stop expecting clarity. You accept the fog because it's always there. The manipulator thrives in this environment. They become the constant in a storm they created. Things are crazy, but I've got your back. No one else understands, but I do. They position themselves as your anchor in a reality they've destabilized, and that's the trap. You cling to the person who's been drowning you. Hypernormalization doesn't just change your expectations, it rewires your tolerance. It teaches you to live in dysfunction so long that peace feels suspicious, truth feels fragile, and control feels impossible. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're already knee-deep in a world where lies feel safer than truth because they're predictable. Concession camouflage. Concession camouflage is the psychological tactic of giving something up, not to show compromise, but to conceal control. It's the illusion of fairness, the act of retreating just enough to appear cooperative while actually anchoring your dominance deeper. The manipulator offers a visible loss, so you overlook the invisible victory. And it works because it feels like they're meeting you halfway when they've already mapped out the entire path. They might say, "You're right, I shouldn't have raised my voice," while keeping the core accusation alive. Or, in a negotiation, "Fine, we'll drop the fee, but we'll need to adjust the timeline." The surface shows sacrifice, but underneath, they've shifted the focus, redirected your attention, and protected what matters most to them, all while appearing generous. This tactic works because humans are wired for fairness. When someone appears to concede, we feel a pull to do the same. It builds social pressure to reciprocate, even if their loss was calculated, even meaningless. They make a show of backing down, so you let your guard down. You think they're being reasonable, so now it's your turn. You compromise more than you planned because they seem to bend first. But it's never random. Their concession is camouflage, a decoy. They've already decided what they're willing to lose to get what they truly want, and they count on your gratitude, your relief, your instinct to be fair to close the trap. It's not generosity, it's strategy. They gave up a pawn, you gave up your queen, and you thanked them for it. Phantom authority is the illusion of power, credibility, or legitimacy conjured from thin air, used to silence doubt, demand obedience, or justify control without ever proving a single thing. It's not about real qualifications. It's about sounding like they have them. It's not about truth. It's about confidence and positioning. And the moment you believe they have authority, they do, because you gave it to them. A manipulator doesn't say, "I think we should do this." They say, "This is how it has to be. Trust me, I know how these things work." They cite vague experts, unnamed sources, invisible policies, or past experience you can't verify. They mention people above them or in the know to lend weight to their words, and suddenly you're second-guessing your instincts, not because they proved you wrong, but because they sounded like they couldn't be questioned. This tactic works because humans are conditioned to obey perceived authority. Teachers, doctors, leaders. We're trained to yield to those who know better. Phantom authority hijacks that instinct. The voice is calm, certain, often slightly condescending. You feel foolish for pushing back, hesitant to demand proof, afraid of being the one who doesn't get it. And that's the hook. They never have to be in power. They just have to act like it, project it, wrap themselves in the costume of authority until you stop asking for credentials, until you nod, until you comply. By then, it doesn't matter who they are. The damage is already done because they didn't need the truth. They only needed your belief, and they got it. False neutrality. False neutrality is the psychological tactic of pretending to be objective or detached while subtly advancing a personal agenda. It's not loud manipulation. It's quiet influence wrapped in the mask of fairness. The manipulator doesn't tell you what to think. They make it seem like they're not thinking anything at all, and that's what makes it so dangerous. They'll say things like, "I'm not taking sides, but," or "I'm just trying to stay out of the drama," but beneath the surface, they're planting seeds, doubts, judgments, emotional cues. meant to nudge you in a specific direction. It sounds balanced, it sounds rational, but the ground is already tilted and you don't even know you're sliding. This tactic thrives on subtlety, a raised eyebrow when someone speaks, a shrug at the mention of someone's name, passive phrases like, "Some people just always need attention," said with no names but aimed like arrows. The manipulator's hands appear clean while everyone else walks away feeling dirty, defensive, or confused. False neutrality lets them hold power without looking responsible. They become the quiet observer, the voice of reason, the one others turn to for clarity, unaware that the clarity they offer has been shaped by quiet biases and calculated omissions. They avoid accountability because they never officially chose a side, but their influence seeps through every word, every pause, every carefully framed response. They don't take positions, they guide them, and when the damage is done, they'll say, "I didn't do anything, I was just trying to stay neutral." And on paper, they didn't. But in reality, they played everyone perfectly. Conformity triggers. Conformity triggers are the subtle psychological cues that pressure you to align, obey, and blend in without ever being directly asked. They tap into a primal part of your brain that equates belonging with survival and standing out with danger. These triggers don't need words. They only need signals, a room full of nodding heads, a chorus of agreement, a long silence after you speak your mind. And suddenly, you question yourself. We are social creatures hardwired to conform. When we see others agree, laugh, freeze, follow, we mirror, not because we're weak, but because we're wired for it. Conformity once kept us alive. Today, it keeps us compliant. Manipulators use this by planting agreement. They look to others in the room with expectant glances. They nod before finishing their sentence, inviting others to follow. They say, "Everyone else is on board," even when no one actually is. They create group pressure in whispers, expressions, timing, not confrontation. You feel it without seeing it. And the moment you feel alone in your thinking, the instinct kicks in. Blend in or be the target. You soften your opinion. You hesitate. You fall quiet. Not because you're wrong, but because no one else is standing with you. The room is speaking, just not out loud. Conformity triggers shift behavior through atmosphere. They weaponize silence, body language, and majority illusion. And before you realize it, you're not just agreeing with the group. You're reshaping yourself to survive it. Not out of belief, but out of fear that being right won't matter if you're standing there, all alone. Assume similarity. Assume similarity is the psychological sleight of hand where a manipulator projects their beliefs, values, or intentions onto you without permission, making it seem like you're already aligned. It's not persuasion through argument, it's persuasion through presumption. Instead of asking if you agree, they speak as if you already do, and suddenly, questioning them feels like questioning yourself. They say things like, "You know how it is. People like us don't let things slide." Or, "Of course you'd feel the same way in my shoes." With every word, they tie your identity to theirs. They attach your sense of integrity, intelligence, or morality to the idea that you must be on their side. After all, you're reasonable, you're loyal, you're like them, right? It works because humans crave belonging. We want to be understood, relatable, normal. So when someone frames an idea as something we believe, it becomes harder to challenge. You risk rejection, awkwardness, even shame, not for the idea itself, but for breaking the illusion of unity. Assumed similarity is quiet, but suffocating. It slips into relationships, workplaces, friendships. The manipulator becomes the mirror. They reflect your identity back at you, but edited to serve their purpose. You're not just disagreeing with them when you push back. You're breaking the emotional contract they claimed you already shared. And that's the trap. You feel compelled to nod, to stay aligned, to prove them right about who you are, but they never saw you. only the version they needed you to be, one that agrees, complies, and follows without even realizing they've been led. Validation withdrawal. Validation withdrawal is the psychological equivalent of emotional starvation, a slow, deliberate removal of praise, attention, and approval that leaves you craving the very thing that used to feel effortless. It's not a punishment spoken aloud. It's an absence, a shift in tone, a missing smile, the silence after a win, the look that used to say, "I'm proud of you," now says nothing at all, and that nothing becomes unbearable. At first, the validation flows freely. Every joke lands, every effort is noticed, every glance feels like warmth. You begin to associate your worth with their recognition, subtly, unconsciously, but completely. And just when that bond feels secure, they pull it back. No fight, no clear reason, just distance, emotional quiet. Suddenly, you're performing harder, trying more, second-guessing everything. You replay conversations, reframe messages, reread their tone like a riddle you can't solve. Did I upset them? Am I not enough anymore? The manipulator doesn't answer. That's the point. Their silence becomes a test you're desperate to pass, and every once in a while they throw you a breadcrumb, just enough attention to keep hope alive. This push-pull dynamic creates dependency. You no longer act from confidence, you act to earn, and they become the judge of your value, the person who decides if you're seen, celebrated, or ignored. Validation withdrawal isn't loud. It doesn't scream, but it cuts, and it works, because the pain of being unseen by someone who once adored you is stronger than most rejections. And the moment you start chasing their approval again, they've won without ever saying a word. Gaslighting is psychological warfare disguised as conversation. It's the deliberate distortion of reality to make someone question their own mind, what they saw, what they felt, what they know. It's not just lying, it's erasing, rewriting, reframing the truth so thoroughly that the victim begins to doubt their memory, their instincts, and eventually their sanity. It begins small. You're overreacting. That's not what happened. You're so sensitive. These phrases seem harmless until they become constant, until every emotional reaction is invalidated, until every truth is challenged with a calm, confident lie. And the worst part? The gaslighter never appears angry. They sound composed, rational, even concerned. I'm just trying to help you understand what really happened. This tactic fractures the victim's sense of self. You remember clearly, but now you're unsure. You feel hurt, but they say it didn't happen. You're upset, but somehow you're the one apologizing. They drip doubt into your mind like poison, and over time, your confidence erodes. You stop speaking up. You start second-guessing yourself. You ask their permission to believe your own experiences. Gaslighting thrives in silence, in isolation. The more they twist reality, the more you cling to them, because no one else gets it. They become your only mirror, your only reference point. And by the time you realize something is wrong, you no longer trust yourself enough to leave. It's psychological domination without physical chains, a slow unraveling of certainty, identity, truth, until one day you look in the mirror and ask a question that should never be asked. Am I the problem? And if the gaslighter's done their job, the answer you hear is yes. Love bombing. Love bombing is the psychological blitz of overwhelming affection, attention, and adoration used not to nurture love, but to control it. It feels like a fairy tale at first. You're showered with compliments, constant messages, surprise gifts, deep conversations that seem to unlock your soul. You're told you're the one, unlike anyone else, and that fate brought you together. It's fast, intense, consuming, and that's exactly the point. The manipulator creates emotional intoxication. They flood your senses with validation, so powerful that your guard falls before you even realize you had one. You don't just like them, you feel chosen, seen, worshipped. They move quickly. I've never felt this way before. Let's plan our future. I don't want to waste any time. You feel special, swept away, magnetic. But under the surface, this isn't love, it's conditioning. Because once they've hooked your heart, the bomb drops. The affection slows, the attention becomes selective, their mood shifts. Suddenly you're confused, wondering what changed, what you did wrong. You try to bring back the version of them who adored you. You chase their approval. You crave the high of those early days, and they know it. That's how control takes hold. You're no longer choosing the relationship. You're addicted to its beginning, and they become the only person who can give it back to you. Love bombing isn't about love. It's about ownership disguised as intimacy. They make you feel like you've found everything, so that when they start taking pieces of it away, you'll do anything to keep the rest, even lose yourself. Negging is a psychological assault disguised as flirtation, humor, or honesty. It's the calculated use of backhanded compliments or subtle put-downs to destabilize your self-esteem, just enough to make you crave the very approval of the person who hurt you. It doesn't scream manipulation, it smirks it, and that smile is the hook. They don't say, "You're not attractive." They say, "You're cute," for someone who doesn't try too hard. They don't insult you outright. They plant doubt. That's bold of you to wear. Most people couldn't pull it off. A laugh follows, maybe a wink, and suddenly you're not offended. You're unsure. You wonder, was that a compliment? Should I feel flattered? But beneath the confusion lies a crack in your confidence. Negging works because it activates insecurity and offers validation in the same breath. It knocks you off balance, then offers to catch you. You find yourself explaining, defending, proving. You want them to like you. You need to win back the approval they just stole. This technique is used in dating, friendships, even toxic workplaces. It targets people who value connection, because the more you care about being liked, the more effective the tactic becomes. It turns self-assured individuals into seekers of validation, desperate to fix the emotional discomfort that negging creates. And when the manipulator sees it work, they reward you. A little praise, a warm moment. It feels like you've earned it, when in truth you've been conditioned to chase it. They tear you down just enough to keep you reaching for their hand, and all the while you think the game is mutual. It's not. It's a trap, wrapped in charm, laced with cruelty. Triangulation. Triangulation is the psychological strategy of control through comparison, competition, and confusion. It's the act of pulling a third person into a two-person dynamic, not for connection, but for manipulation. The goal isn't resolution, it's instability. The manipulator doesn't confront directly. Instead, they pit people against each other, dangle attention like bait, and watch as insecurity and jealousy take root where trust once lived. It starts with subtle mentions. "Well, Sarah never had a problem with this," or "Honestly, I was just talking to Mark, and he gets me in a way no one else does." You're not just hearing a name, you're hearing a threat, a ghost of someone better, more agreeable, more lovable. And now you're performing, competing, proving, trying to earn back something you didn't know you were about to lose. In romantic relationships, triangulation breeds obsession and doubt. You feel compared, ranked, replaceable. In friendships or workplaces, it creates factions and paranoia. Suddenly, people stop trusting each other because they're too busy wondering what's being said behind closed doors. And the manipulator? They sit at the center of the chaos they quietly created, receiving attention, allegiance, and power from every side. Triangulation works because it destabilizes your emotional ground. It makes you fight for validation. It rewrites the story so that your enemy isn't them. It's the other person they strategically introduce. You're distracted by the rivalry, while the puppet strings remain invisible. And by the time you realize you were never actually in competition, they've already moved the game somewhere else, with someone new. Silent treatment. The silent treatment is not silence. It's control wrapped in absence. It's a psychological freeze-out designed to punish, confuse, and dominate by withholding the most basic form of connection, acknowledgement. It doesn't scream, it doesn't fight, it simply disappears. And in that emptiness, it makes you suffer. You speak, and they say nothing. You ask, and they look away. You try to apologize, to explain, to make sense of what you did, but you're met with a void. No words, no warmth, just a heavy, icy wall where a person used to be. And somehow, even though they created the distance, you feel like the one who's wrong, like you're the one begging for something you don't deserve. The silent treatment weaponizes emotional abandonment. It taps into the primitive fear of isolation, the terror of being cast out, unloved, unseen. It makes you question everything. What did I do? Why won't they talk to me? How do I fix this? That spiral of doubt is exactly what the manipulator wants, because the longer you sit in silence, the more desperate you become to break it. And when they finally speak again, soft, calm, forgiving, you feel relief, gratitude, even loyalty. But nothing was resolved. The damage wasn't healed. It was buried, under compliance, under fear, under the growing need to never feel that silence again. That's the power of the silent treatment. It doesn't end arguments. It ends resistance. It teaches you one thing above all: speak carefully, behave better, or next time, the silence will return, and it will be longer, colder, deeper. Breadcrumbing is the psychological tactic of offering just enough affection, attention, or hope to keep someone emotionally invested without ever committing, connecting, or delivering. It's not love, it's not care, it's control disguised as potential, and it starves you in slow motion while making you believe the next breadcrumb might finally be the feast. It starts with a message at midnight, a compliment out of nowhere, a vague plan to catch up soon that never materializes, just enough to stir the feelings, reignite the hope, make you believe there's still something there. But every time you reach for closeness, they pull back. Every time you seek clarity, they blur the lines. Their words sparkle with possibility, but their actions vanish into fog. The genius of breadcrumbing is in its inconsistency. If they ignored you completely, you'd walk away. But they don't. They give just enough: a like on your post, a reply to your story, a memory they bring up to keep the emotional cord alive. And you hang on, not to the present, but to the potential, to what it could be, to what it once almost was. And that's the trap. You begin lowering your standards. You rationalize. You wait longer between crumbs. You tell yourself they're busy, hurt, scared, anything to justify the starvation, because admitting they're not coming closer means facing the truth that the person who keeps you hoping is also the one keeping you empty. Breadcrumbing isn't affection. It's manipulation by deprivation, and the more you starve, the sweeter the crumbs feel, until you forget you were ever meant for more than scraps. Future faking is the manipulation of hope. It's the act of painting vivid, seductive pictures of a shared future just to get what they want in the present. It's not about plans, it's about control, and it works because the fantasy feels so good you stop noticing how little they're actually doing to build it. They'll talk about the house you'll buy together, the trips you'll take, the business you'll start. They'll promise changes, healing, stability, soon. Once things calm down, I'll commit fully. Next month, we'll take that step. We just need to get through this, and then everything will be different. You cling to these words because they sound sincere, detailed, emotional, but they're nothing more than currency used to buy your patience, trust, and sacrifice. The tragedy of future faking is that it never intends to deliver. The dream is a leash, and the more emotionally invested you become in the vision, the more you tolerate the reality. Broken promises, delays, excuses, but you stay because walking away feels like abandoning the future they made you believe in. You don't want to lose what is. You're terrified to lose what could be. That's the trap, and they know it. Future faking isn't a failure of effort. It's a strategy of postponement. The promises are always around the corner. The milestone is always next season. And meanwhile, they get your loyalty, your energy, your forgiveness. You wait for the life they sold you, while they keep collecting everything they need without ever giving you anything real in return. Projection. Projection is the psychological defense turned weapon, where someone takes their own flaws, fears, or guilt and pins them onto you. It's the act of accusing you of what they themselves are doing, feeling, or thinking, all while keeping their own hands clean. It's gaslighting's cunning cousin. It doesn't just deny reality, it swaps it, so you carry their darkness while they walk away spotless. They lie and accuse you of dishonesty. They cheat and question your loyalty. They feel insecure, and suddenly you're too controlling. You bring up a valid concern, and they twist it into, "You're always attacking me." Their own guilt becomes your burden. Their shame becomes your crime. And worst of all, it works, because it puts you on the defensive while they deflect scrutiny. Projection is terrifyingly effective because it short-circuits your instinct for justice. You start focusing on clearing your name instead of questioning why they accused you in the first place. You explain, reassure, apologize. You doubt yourself. You wonder if maybe somehow they're right. And every time you absorb their projection, you inch closer to their version of reality and further from your own. This tactic doesn't just protect their ego, it erodes yours. It makes you feel broken, toxic, unstable, when in truth, you're just carrying the weight of emotions that were never yours to begin with. And that's the cruel brilliance of projection. They don't hide their flaws. They just make you believe they're yours. And by the time you start to feel them, they've already walked away, guilt-free, while you sit in the shadow they left behind. Consensus gaslighting. Consensus gaslighting is a psychological ambush that doesn't just make you question your reality, it makes you feel alone in it. It's the manipulation of truth through manufactured agreement, where the manipulator doesn't just deny what happened, they surround you with voices, real or implied, that say you're the only one who sees it that way. And that isolation is where the damage begins. They'll say, "Everyone else thought you were being dramatic," or "Nobody else had a problem with what I said." Maybe it's not even said aloud, just a glance exchanged with others in the room, a whisper after you speak, a smirk that signals, "You're the outsider here." Suddenly, it's not just their word against yours, it's everyone's. And the weight of that collective denial crushes your certainty. This tactic weaponizes social proof. Humans are wired to trust the group, to seek belonging, to question ourselves before we question the tribe. Consensus gaslighting hijacks that instinct, making you feel like your emotions, memories, or reactions are not just wrong, they're delusional. Because if everyone saw it differently, then maybe the problem is you. The manipulator uses silence, agreement, and even fabricated support to build a wall of truth around you, a truth you can't penetrate. You start editing your voice, shrinking your instincts, second-guessing the moments you once saw clearly. Because what's worse than being wrong? Feeling like you're wrong alone. And over time, you stop fighting back, not because you believe them, but because no one else seems to believe you. Playing victim. Playing victim is the psychological strategy of weaponizing vulnerability, not to seek help, but to gain control. It's not about being hurt. It's about appearing hurt at precisely the right moment to silence criticism, avoid accountability, or manipulate sympathy. The manipulator paints themselves as the wounded party, even when they're the one holding the knife. They twist the narrative with subtle emotional cues, a tearful voice, a trembling sigh, a well-timed breakdown. When confronted, they don't argue the facts. They collapse under the weight of how unfair it all feels. "I can't believe you'd say that to me after everything I've done for you. I guess I'm always the bad guy, no matter what." Suddenly, Your anger feels cruel. Your truth feels like betrayal, and the focus shifts from their actions to your tone, from their lies to your lack of compassion. Playing victim is powerful because it forces you to choose between being right and being kind, and most people will abandon truth to avoid looking heartless. The manipulator knows this. They weaponize empathy. They know your conscience is a lever, and they pull it hard, right when you begin to find your voice. Over time, you stop expressing hurt altogether. You walk on eggshells, afraid that your needs will make you the bully. You become their emotional caretaker instead of their equal, and they stay protected, shielded by the illusion of fragility they've carefully constructed. They don't need to win the argument. They just need to make you feel like a monster, forever starting one. Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail is coercion wrapped in love. It's not a direct threat. It's a veiled one, a raised eyebrow, a trembling voice, a well-timed silence that says, "If you don't do what I want, I'll make you feel like you broke me." It's a trap built not on force, but on your empathy. And it works because it doesn't use chains. It uses guilt. The manipulator won't scream. They'll sigh. "I guess I'm just not that important to you. I thought you were different. After all I've done for you." The words hit like punches, dressed as pleas. They don't attack, they bleed, and you rush to fix it, not because you're wrong, but because you're afraid of hurting them. Or worse, afraid of being seen as someone who could. This tactic flips love into leverage. Your compassion becomes the rope around your neck. The more you care, the tighter it pulls. You find yourself making choices not from desire or truth, but from fear of emotional fallout. What if they withdraw? What if they cry? What if they leave? Emotional blackmail is especially potent in relationships that matter most. Family, romance, deep friendships. The manipulator plays the victim flawlessly, and each time you bend to soothe their sadness, you teach them something. This works. So they do it again and again, until one day you're not sure where their needs end and your freedom begins. You're not being loved, you're being leveraged, and the cost of saying no is your peace. Fear appeal. Fear appeal is the psychological tactic of planting anxiety, dread, or imagined consequences to steer your choices, not with logic, but with looming threat. It doesn't shout, it whispers. What if this is your last chance? Can you really afford to take that risk? It presses on your most primal instinct, survival, and once fear is in your bloodstream, obedience follows like gravity. The manipulator doesn't have to forbid. They just paint a future where disobedience leads to loss, loss of love, loss of safety, loss of worth. They don't say, "Do what I say." They say, "You wouldn't want to end up like them," or "People who walk away usually regret it." Suddenly, you're not weighing pros and cons, you're imagining disaster. Fear appeal thrives because it bypasses reasoning and grabs emotion by the throat. It floods the mind with worst-case scenarios. Your job, your relationship, your future. Everything starts to look fragile, and they present themselves as the only one who can protect you, the one with the answer, the one who can keep you safe. Used by abusive partners, toxic bosses, political regimes, and cult leaders, this tactic makes courage feel reckless and compliance feel wise, but it's a false choice, one where staying still feels smart, even as it slowly erodes your power. Fear doesn't need to be real to control you, it just needs to be vivid, and once it's inside you, it starts to whisper louder than reason, louder than truth, until the only way to quiet it is to do exactly what they want. Mirroring is the psychological technique of becoming someone's reflection, matching their body language, speech patterns, emotional energy, and even their values to create the illusion of deep connection. It's not about imitation, it's about infiltration. The more someone sees themselves in you, the more they trust you, open up to you, and ultimately follow you. It starts subtly. They lean in, you lean in. They speak softly, You soften too. They laugh a certain way. You echo it a beat later. It's invisible yet powerful. Your rhythm becomes theirs, and their brain picks up the cues: familiarity, safety, similarity. And humans are drawn to what feels familiar, even if it's being fabricated in real time. Mirroring goes beyond posture and tone. It dives into belief systems. If they're passionate about justice, so are you. If they share trauma, you've been through something just like that. Every detail they reveal becomes a tool to reflect back at them, warped just enough to seem authentic, but curated to gain influence. And it works because it feels like fate, like chemistry, like finally someone gets you. But this technique can be sinister in the wrong hands. Manipulators use it to bypass defenses and build a false sense of intimacy fast. You think you found your soulmate, your confidant, your ally, when in reality, you're bonding with a carefully constructed version of yourself. And when the mask eventually slips, you're left disoriented, betrayed, and exposed, not just because they lied, but because they used you to do it. Mirroring doesn't earn your trust. It mirrors it back until you give it away, willingly, completely, blindly. Social proof. Social proof is the psychological force that convinces you something is right, not because it makes sense, but because everyone else seems to believe it. It's conformity disguised as logic. You don't want to be the first to question it, the only one who doubts it, or the outlier who walks away from what the crowd has already accepted. So you follow, quietly, even if something deep inside whispers otherwise. The manipulator leverages this instinct by surrounding you with symbols of approval, group agreement, fake consensus, curated testimonials, or manufactured popularity. Everyone's on board. No one else had a problem with it. I thought you were smarter than the rest. They don't need to prove their point. They just need to convince you others have already accepted it. This tactic works because humans are tribal. Belonging equals safety. Rejection equals threat. And so, when we see others nodding, applauding, following, we suppress our doubt. We doubt ourselves instead. We go along not because we're convinced, but because standing alone feels more dangerous than standing wrong with everyone else. In relationships, this looks like, my friends all think you're overreacting. In workplaces, the whole team agrees. In cults or politics, roaring applause, uniformity, silence from the few who dare to think differently. Dissent dies in the face of loud unity. And the scariest part? Social proof doesn't need truth. It only needs volume, visibility, repetition. Once you feel like the last one who disagrees, you don't just question the idea, you start questioning yourself. And that's when you fall in line. Not because they proved anything, but because no one else seemed to need proof. Foot in the door is the psychological tactic of getting someone to agree to a small, seemingly harmless request, only to use that yes as the gateway to a much bigger ask. It's not about the request itself. It's about getting your compliance to start. Because once you say yes, your brain wants to stay consistent, and that desire for internal harmony becomes the lever that opens the door wider. It begins with something minor. Can you sign this petition? Can I borrow 5 minutes of your time? Would you mind helping me move a box? You agree, because why wouldn't you? It's easy, it's polite, it costs nothing. But that first yes is the setup, the trap, because right after it comes the escalation. Since you're already helping, could you stay and help with the rest? Now that we're talking, can I ask a bigger favor? Would you consider investing in the full project? Your brain now faces a conflict. Do I stay consistent, or do I backtrack and seem unreliable? Most people, especially empathetic, agreeable ones, choose to follow through, and the manipulator knows it. This technique thrives in sales, manipulation, and toxic dynamics where pressure builds gradually. You never notice how much you've agreed to because it happened in steps, one yes at a time, 1 inch of ground given until you're standing far from where you began. The genius of foot in the door is that it doesn't force you to jump. It just asks you to step, and before you know it, you've walked yourself into a place you never intended to go, all because saying yes felt easier than saying no. Door in the face. Door in the face is the psychological technique of asking for something outrageous, not to get it, but to make what you actually want seem reasonable by comparison. It's manipulation through contrast, a trick that turns no into yes by making the second request feel like mercy when it was always the goal. It begins with an ask you'd never agree to. Can you lend me $5,000? Will you take over this entire project alone? Can I move in with you next month? The absurdity triggers instant rejection, but that's exactly what they want, because once you say no, they pivot. Okay, how about just $200? Maybe you could just lead the first week. Could I crash on your couch for a weekend instead? Now your resistance is lowered. You feel like they compromise, like you're meeting in the middle. But the truth is, they never wanted the first thing. It was a setup, a false extreme, designed to make the real request seem small, fair, generous, and suddenly you're saying yes, not because the second ask is right, but because it's less wrong than the first. This tactic preys on your sense of guilt, fairness, and the instinct to reciprocate. You said no once, so now you feel pressure to soften, and that shift from defense to cooperation gives them the exact opening they planned for. Door in the face doesn't take no personally. It uses no, because once you reject something unreasonable, you're primed to accept what you would have questioned if it hadn't followed something far worse. Scarcity. Scarcity is the psychological trigger that makes something feel more valuable, desirable, and urgent simply because it appears limited. It's not about what the thing is. It's about the illusion that you might not be able to have it. That fear, that subtle panic of loss, is the manipulator's most seductive tool, because once your brain senses scarcity, logic goes quiet and craving takes over. They say, only a few spots left. This opportunity won't come again. If you don't act now, someone else will. Suddenly, you're not deciding from want. You're deciding from fear of missing out. Scarcity hijacks your survival instinct. It frames hesitation as failure. It makes delay feel dangerous. And it pushes you into decisions you wouldn't have made if time or access felt infinite. Manipulators use this in relationships too. They become hot and cold, available then distant. You never quite know when they'll pull away, so you cling harder when they're close. They condition you to see their presence as a privilege, fleeting, fragile, earned. Scarcity makes you chase, not because they're giving more, but because they're withholding. It shows up in marketing, love bombing, fake deadlines, and even threats of walking away. Scarcity doesn't enhance the thing itself. It enhances your anxiety around losing it. That's the trick. You start making choices not from alignment or desire, but from panic. And once you've moved from calm to scarcity-driven action, the manipulator has you exactly where they want you, rushing, apologizing, proving, buying, agreeing, just so you don't lose what was never guaranteed in the first place. Authority bias. Authority bias is the psychological shortcut that convinces you someone must be right, not because of their logic, but because of their title, their tone, their posture, their status. It's not persuasion, it's blind deference, a deep-rooted instinct to obey those who appear to hold power, even when what they're saying feels wrong. Especially then, it starts with a suit, a clipboard, a confident voice, a casual reference to credentials, as someone who's done this for years, or, trust me, I've seen it all. Suddenly, your internal compass tilts. You start to second-guess your own perception. You lower your voice. You nod more. You listen, not because the information is sound, but because the speaker sounds like someone you should believe. This bias is hardwired. From childhood, we're taught to trust teachers, doctors, leaders, parents, and manipulators exploit that trust. They adopt the tone of authority. They drop names. They flash affiliations. And before you even realize it, you're placing their judgment above your own. It happens in cults, corporate offices, classrooms, relationships. The person who positions themselves as in charge begins shaping your decisions, your values, even your identity. You don't want to challenge them because challenging them feels like rebellion, like danger, like you're wrong before you've even spoken. Authority bias doesn't just distort logic, it replaces it. And the moment you surrender your instincts to someone else's credentials, you're no longer thinking, you're following. Not because you trust the truth, but because you've been trained to trust the person claiming to own it. Reciprocity. Reciprocity is the psychological reflex that makes you feel obligated to give something back whenever someone gives to you. No matter how small, no matter the motive, it feels like morality, like fairness, like being a good person. But in the wrong hands, reciprocity becomes a leash, a way to buy your compliance with kindness so that your refusal later feels like betrayal. It starts with a gesture, a favor you didn't ask for, a compliment you didn't expect, a gift that feels too generous. The manipulator gives generously, strategically, not because they care, but because they know what comes next. You'll feel like you owe them, and once you feel indebted, they collect. After all I've done for you, I was there when no one else was. You can't seriously say no after everything, right? These phrases aren't gratitude, they're currency, because now your kindness isn't a gift, it's a transaction, one they've already charged you for. Reciprocity works because it feels good to return the favor. It makes us feel human, connected, decent. Manipulators weaponize that. They give when it costs them little and then ask for something that costs you a lot. And when you hesitate, they don't guilt you directly. They let the imbalance speak, and it's deafening. You find yourself agreeing, sacrificing, giving more than you want, because rejecting them feels like rejecting generosity itself. But it wasn't generosity, it was bait. And once you take it, you're not being generous in return. You're being controlled by your own conscience, by your own need to be fair, and they know that's exactly where they've won. Halo effect. The halo effect is the psychological illusion that wraps one positive trait, like attractiveness, charm, or status, around a person like a glow, blinding you to everything else. It's not that they earned your trust, it's that they looked the part, sounded right, smiled the right way, and suddenly you assume they're smart, kind, honest, capable, even when they're anything but. You meet someone who's confident and charismatic, and without even realizing it, you fill in the blanks. They must also be successful, trustworthy, good-hearted. You don't have evidence. You don't need it. Your brain craves coherence, so it shortcuts from "this person makes me feel good" to "this person is good." Manipulators exploit this instinct mercilessly. They polish their image, dress well, speak eloquently, hold eye contact. They become the person your subconscious wants to believe in. And once that halo is shining, they can get away with almost anything. Lies are ignored. Red flags are reframed as quirks. You defend them when others question them, not because of facts, but because of how they made you feel. The halo effect isn't just deception, it's self-deception. You want to believe in them. You've already emotionally invested in the version of them you projected. So, admitting they're flawed doesn't just threaten the truth. It threatens your judgment, your pride, your narrative, and so you justify, excuse, forgive. The halo blinds you slowly, and by the time you start seeing the shadows behind it, you're already deep inside their glow, too loyal, too invested, and too ashamed to admit they were never shining at all. Blame shifting. Blame shifting is the psychological slight that flips the script, turning every accusation, every mistake, every moment of conflict back onto you. It's not about denying what happened. It's about making you responsible for it. The manipulator doesn't just dodge accountability. They hand it to you, gift-wrapped in guilt, confusion, and emotional fatigue. You catch them in a lie, and somehow you end up defending your tone. You bring up a boundary and they say, "You're always so controlling." You express hurt and they ask, "Why are you attacking me right now?" The issue disappears, the spotlight turns, and suddenly you're the one on trial. Blame shifting is especially cruel because it weaponizes empathy. It relies on your willingness to consider their perspective, to stay open-minded, to reflect on your part in things. And while you do that, while you spiral into overthinking, apologies, and self-doubt, they sit comfortably in the wreckage they cause, untouched by consequence. They don't deny your pain, they redefine it. They don't reject your argument, they reframe it to highlight your flaws. "I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't pushed me." "You make everything so difficult." "You always turn things into a fight." Each line isn't just deflection, it's poison. And the more you hear it, the more you start to believe it. Eventually, you're not just absorbing blame, you're expecting it. You start filtering reality through their lens. One where you're always too much, too wrong, too broken, and they never have to change because you've been trained to believe that every problem starts with you. Overpersonalization. Overpersonalization is the psychological tactic of turning neutral events, feedback, or disagreements into personal attacks, making you feel like the problem isn't the situation, but you. It's not about what happened. It's about how they frame it to make you question your character, your motives, your worth. And once you believe that, they don't need to control your actions because you'll start doing it yourself. You express a boundary and they respond with, "Wow, so now I'm just a burden to you?" You bring up a concern and they say, "Why are you always so critical of me?" A plan changes and they accuse you of never caring in the first place. Suddenly, you're defending yourself, not your point, your intention, not the outcome. They've made the moment about your flaws, not the facts. This manipulation hits hard because it targets your deepest need, to be seen as good, fair, loving. And when someone twists a disagreement into an indictment of your identity, it strikes a nerve that logic can't protect. You want to fix it, clarify, prove you're not who they say you are, and that desperate need to correct the story makes you vulnerable to control. Overpersonalization flips the script in an instant. You came with honesty, you leave with guilt. And the more you try to be understood, the more power you give them to shape who you think you are. It's emotional distortion, a mirror that reflects back not what you've done, but who they want you to believe you are. And if you stare at it long enough, you'll forget what your own reflection really looks like. Shame triggers. Shame triggers are psychological landmines that manipulators plant in your identity, quietly, surgically, so they can detonate your self-worth with a word, a look, or a well-timed silence. It's not just about hurting your feelings. It's about targeting the parts of you that already feel fragile, the parts you hide, the parts you secretly fear are unlovable. They find those weak spots through observation, a comment you brushed off, a flinch when someone mentioned your past, a hesitation when you talked about your body, your intelligence, your failures, and once they know where it hurts, they don't need to scream, they just need to tap. You're acting just like your mother. Maybe you're not as strong as you think. There it is again, the victim in you. These aren't insults, they're triggers, words soaked in history, insecurity, trauma, and they don't just sting, they collapse you. They make you shrink, apologize, over-explain, because suddenly the fight isn't about what was said, it's about proving you're not broken, not needy, not too much. And while you spiral in shame, the manipulator stays calm, collected, even righteous. Says shame triggers work because shame isolates. You stop speaking up, you start self-editing, you walk on emotional glass, terrified of the next wound they'll reopen. And worse, you think it's your fault for being sensitive. You shouldn't feel this way, but you do, because they aimed exactly where you're already bleeding, and they never once had to raise their voice to make you feel like nothing. Time pressure. Time pressure is the psychological tactic of forcing decisions under the illusion that the clock is running out, leaving no room for reflection, boundaries, or doubt. It doesn't give you time to think. That's the point. It replaces clarity with urgency, and urgency with compliance. The manipulator doesn't want a considered answer. They want a fast one. And fast almost always means yes. They say, "This offer is only good for today. If you don't decide now, I'll assume you're not serious. Everyone else already gave their answer." Each phrase is a timer, ticking away your space to breathe, analyze, or ask why the rush exists in the first place. But you don't stop to ask, because time pressure hijacks your nervous system, making your body react before your brain can respond. When you feel rushed, your survival instincts override your judgment. You think less clearly. Your fear of missing out, disappointing someone, or losing an opportunity takes over. You tell yourself you'll figure it out after you say yes, but by then, it's already too late. You're entangled. You've signed. You've promised. You've stepped into a situation designed to benefit them. Time pressure doesn't just push. It shrinks the world. It makes you believe there's only one shot, one door, one path. And if you don't leap now, it disappears forever. But that's the trick. It's rarely true. The urgency isn't real. The clock is theirs. And once you start running to match their timeline, you stop moving to your own. Intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is the psychological hook that keeps you addicted to uncertainty by rewarding you just enough to keep you coming back, but never enough to feel secure. It's the emotional equivalent of a slot machine. Random wins, long droughts, moments of magic followed by silence. And that unpredictability is exactly what makes it so hard to walk away. The manipulator gives you glimpses of affection, approval, attention, the warmth you crave. Then they pull it away. No explanation, no warning. You're left wondering what changed, what you did wrong. And just when you're about to pull away, they flood you with love again. Apologies, passion, promises. It feels like everything you hoped for, but it never lasts. This pattern rewires your brain. You stop chasing connection. You start chasing relief. Relief from the cold, from the confusion, from the emptiness they created. Your nervous system is caught in a cycle of hope and despair, high and crash, pleasure and punishment. It's not love, it's conditioning. And the cruelest part? The reward doesn't have to be big. A text, a compliment, a glance. That tiny hit of dopamine reignites your belief. Maybe this time it's real. So you stay, you try harder, you make excuses, because every once in a while they make you feel chosen. And when you've been starving for validation, even crumbs feel like a feast. But this isn't inconsistency, it's strategy. The chaos isn't accidental. It's a system designed to keep you chasing, because if you never know when the love is coming, you'll never stop reaching for it, even if it breaks you. Overcomplication. Overcomplication is the psychological tactic of making something seem so intricate, confusing, or layered that you eventually stop trying to understand and just agree. It's not about clarity, it's about fatigue. The manipulator drowns you in details, jargon, or conflicting information until your brain taps out and defaults to their conclusion. You don't surrender because they made sense. You surrender because you're tired. They pile on explanations. It's actually more nuanced than that. You'd really have to study it to get the full picture. You're only seeing one side of this. And then come the charts, the references, the endless backstory. Every answer raises more questions. Every clarification demands a deeper dive. It stops being a conversation and becomes a maze. And here's the trick. The complexity isn't there to inform you. It's there to overwhelm you. It creates the illusion that you're unqualified to challenge them, that you lack the knowledge, the context, the authority. So you fall back, you nod, you agree, just to end the mental exhaustion. This tactic is used by toxic bosses, controlling partners, manipulative experts, and abusers of power. They turn simple boundaries into ethical debates, clear issues into philosophical quandaries. They make you feel foolish for expecting clarity, as if your confusion is your fault, not their design. Overcomplication doesn't solve problems, it buries them. And once you've been buried deep enough, you stop fighting for truth. You settle for their version of it, because it's easier, because it's louder, because your brain is screaming for relief, and they've made sure the only way out is through them. Appeal to tradition. Appeal to tradition is the psychological manipulation of making you feel wrong for questioning the way things have always been. It's not about truth, it's about obedience. It silences resistance by cloaking control in nostalgia, in routine, in legacy. And it works because humans crave certainty, especially when the present feels unstable. The manipulator doesn't argue facts, they argue familiarity. This is just how our family works. That's how we've always done things here. People like us don't change what already works. These aren't explanations, they're commands disguised as culture. You're not being asked to agree. You're being told that agreement is required if you want to belong. This tactic corners you emotionally. If you push back, you're not just disagreeing, you're disrespecting history, dishonoring your roots, rejecting your role. They make it personal. Your refusal means you think you're better, ungrateful, arrogant, and that shame of breaking tradition is what keeps you silent. Appeal to tradition kills innovation, stunts growth, and enables toxic cycles. It protects outdated power structures with a smile and a shrug. It's just the way it is. But nothing just is. It was built that way, and when someone weaponizes that foundation to maintain their comfort or dominance, your discomfort is dismissed as rebellion. You'll start to question yourself. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe change is disrespectful. Maybe suffering is just tradition. And that's the lie. Not that the tradition exists, but that it's untouchable, unquestionable, sacred, when in reality, it's just another mask someone wears to keep you in your place, quiet, compliant, and bound by rules you never chose. Playing dumb. Playing dumb is the psychological tactic of feigning ignorance to avoid responsibility, gain power, or dodge confrontation, all while making you feel irrational, demanding, or cruel for expecting accountability. It's not forgetfulness. It's strategy, a way to blur boundaries under the guise of innocence and make you do the emotional and mental labor they refuse to carry. They say, "I didn't realize that upset you," when they've done it 10 times before. "I'm just not good at this stuff," as a shield against basic empathy. "You never told me that," even when you did, clearly, directly, repeatedly. Their confusion is never real. It's selective, a mask they wear to disarm your anger and redirect the conversation away from their actions and onto your expectations. This tactic works because it puts you in the role of teacher, fixer, parent, explainer, and while you're walking them through the same issue for the 5th time, they sit back, untouched by guilt, protected by feigned incompetence. The more frustrated you get, the more unreasonable you look, and suddenly, you are the problem. You're too intense, too sensitive, too hard to please. Playing dumb gives the manipulator the upper hand by pretending they don't even know the game is happening, and when called out, they retreat deeper into helplessness. "Wow, I'm really trying here," they say, as you drown in emotional exhaustion. They win by wearing you down, not with resistance, but with blank stares and gentle shrugs, and by the time you realize they understood all along, you've already done the heavy lifting they pretended they couldn't do. Tactical ignorance. Tactical ignorance is the act of pretending not to know, not to notice, or not to understand something, when in reality, the manipulator knows exactly what they're doing. It's not confusion, it's control, it's silence where there should be acknowledgement, apathy where there should be accountability, and it's designed to wear you down, not through force, but through sheer emotional exhaustion. You call out the hurtful comment, and they blink slowly. What do you mean? I was just joking. You express your needs, and they look confused. I didn't realize it mattered that much to you. You point to a pattern, and they act surprised, despite years of doing the exact same thing. You never told me that bothered you. It's all an act, a performance of ignorance, and it works because it shifts the burden of explanation onto you, again and again. Every time you try to clarify, prove, remind, or justify, you sink deeper into the quicksand. You feel unheard, unseen, and worst of all, crazy. You start questioning yourself. Maybe you weren't clear. Maybe they really didn't understand. But deep down, you know they did. They do. They're choosing not to know because knowing would mean changing, or admitting fault, or giving up control. Tactical ignorance keeps the manipulator in power without ever having to argue. They just shrug, smile, or play dumb while you carry the emotional weight of the entire relationship. You end up managing their feelings, their memory, their mistakes, while they pretend they don't know what you're so upset about. But they do. They always did. Projection of confidence. Projection of confidence is the psychological tactic of speaking, acting, and moving with such certainty that others mistake it for truth, even when it's built on nothing but air. It doesn't matter if they're right. It matters that they sound right, because when someone delivers their words with unwavering tone, steady eye contact, and absolute presence, the brain stops questioning and starts following. Confidence is contagious. The manipulator knows that. They speak with authority, even when their facts are shaky. They make bold statements, take up space, interrupt without hesitation. They don't fumble, pause, or second guess. And in a world wired to respond to dominance, people assume that certainty must mean competence. This tactic works because most people are plagued with self-doubt. We double-check, overthink, apologize before we speak. So when someone walks into a room like they own it, no hesitation, no disclaimers, we instinctively defer. We assume they've earned that confidence. We trust them before verifying anything, and they use that trust as a shortcut straight to influence. Projection of confidence silences dissent. It makes others feel unsure about their own instincts. In arguments, it reframes truth by sheer presence. In leadership, it builds followings on charisma instead of wisdom. In manipulation, it becomes a mask, one that hides insecurity, lies, and empty claims beneath a polished delivery. The tragedy is, people often regret what they agreed to in the presence of confidence after it fades. But by then, the decision is made, the deal is signed, the door is closed, because confidence doesn't need to be real. It just needs to look like it belongs in charge. Social isolation. Social isolation is one of the most calculated and devastating psychological control tactics. It doesn't scream, it quietly removes one person, then another, until the only voice you hear is theirs. It's not always locked doors or ultimatums. Sometimes it's just subtle wedges, doubts planted, friendships questioned, families mislabeled as toxic. It starts with concern. They don't really support you. I don't like the way they talk to you. You're better when it's just us. At first, it feels protective, like someone is shielding you. But over time, the circle shrinks. Calls go unreturned. Invitations stop coming. You're too busy now. But what you're really becoming is alone. This tactic is about power through dependency. The fewer outside influences you have, the more you rely on the manipulator for emotional support, validation, and even reality itself. They become your entire world, and when someone is your world, you'll do anything not to lose them. They don't need to tell you to cut people off. They just make you want to. Make it seem like your friends are jealous, your family's overbearing, that everyone else just doesn't get it. And by the time you realize what's happened, your lifelines are gone. You don't know who to turn to, or worse, you're too ashamed to reach out. Social isolation breaks you not with violence, but with silence, with absence. It makes you smaller, quieter, more pliable, because when someone is the only voice left, their word becomes law, and they don't have to raise their voice to dominate you. They just have to make sure no one else is around to remind you of who you were before. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is the psychological tactic of twisting your empathy into a leash, making you feel responsible for someone else's disappointment, sadness, or pain, even when you've done nothing wrong. It's not about solving a problem. It's about creating an emotional weight heavy enough to bend your behavior. You're not being asked. You're being shamed into saying yes. It sounds like, I guess I'll just do it myself, even though I'm exhausted, or I didn't expect you to care anyway. The words sting not because they're loud, but because they're subtle. They target your conscience, your need to be kind, your fear of being seen as selfish. And the manipulator knows that once guilt enters the room, logic quietly steps out. You begin second-guessing your boundaries, wondering if maybe you are being unfair. You didn't do anything cruel, but now you feel cruel for not doing more. So you apologize, you give in, you try to make it right. Not because it is right, but because the emotional fog makes it feel like you're holding the knife. Over time, guilt tripping becomes a pattern, a way to control your actions without ever making demands. The manipulator doesn't take responsibility for their needs. They make you feel like you failed to meet them, and in trying to avoid hurting them, you end up hurting yourself. Guilt tripping doesn't shout. It sighs, it sulks, it wounds itself in front of you and says, "Look what you made me feel." And the more compassion you have, the tighter the chain becomes, until you're no longer acting out of choice, but out of guilt you never should have carried. Double standards. Double standards are the psychological sleight of hand that gives the manipulator endless freedom, while holding you to rules they would never follow themselves. It's not just hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. They position themselves as the exception, the justified one, the misunderstood soul, while you're expected to be perfect, patient, and endlessly accountable. They can raise their voice in an argument, but if you do, you're crazy. They can cancel plans last minute, but if you're late, you're inconsiderate. They can lie for your protection, but if you leave out a detail, you're dishonest. The rules don't apply to them, and somehow they convince you they shouldn't. This tactic is designed to chip away at your confidence, to trap you in a cycle where you're constantly apologizing, explaining, or trying to be better, while they offer no such effort in return. And every time you call it out, they flip it. So now you're keeping score? I guess I'm just not allowed to make mistakes. They make you feel petty for wanting balance, for wanting fairness, for wanting the same grace they take without question. Double standards keep you walking on eggshells. You monitor your tone, your timing, your truth, while they walk freely, unquestioned. You bend to stay worthy. They stand tall, even when they're wrong. And over time, you internalize their rules. You must be perfect. They are already enough. The more unequal the standard, the more powerful they become. Because now you're not just in a relationship with them, you're in a performance for them. One where they never audition, but you're always at risk of being replaced. Labeling is the psychological tactic of reducing a person to a single word or trait, then using that label as a weapon to control their behavior, silence their voice, or undermine their reality. It's not feedback, it's identity theft. Because once someone defines you, they can manipulate you, not by arguing your actions, but by attacking who you are. It starts small. You express frustration and they say, "You're so dramatic." You ask a question and it becomes, "You're always so suspicious." You stand up for yourself and suddenly you're being selfish. These aren't observations. They're sentences, verdicts handed down without a trial. And once the label sticks, every move you make is filtered through it. The brilliance and cruelty of labeling is that it puts you on defense. You stop focusing on what's true and start trying to prove you're not what they called you. I'm not crazy. I'm not needy. I'm not controlling. But now the conversation isn't about your point. It's about your identity, and they've already rewritten it. In toxic relationships, this tactic becomes a cage. The more you resist the label, the more it tightens. The more you shrink, the more they say, "See, this is exactly what I mean." It traps you in a loop where any reaction becomes confirmation. Labeling isn't about understanding, it's about control through simplification. It erases your complexity so you're easier to dismiss, shame, and manipulate. And worst of all, if you hear it enough, you might start to believe it. You stop asking, "Is this true?" and start wondering, "Is this just who I am?" Word salad. Word salad is the psychological smokescreen that drowns truth in chaos, where the manipulator floods you with convoluted language, circular reasoning, and intellectual noise to avoid accountability and confuse you into silence. It sounds like logic, it looks like intelligence, but it's a defense mechanism masked as discourse, and its goal isn't clarity, it's control. You ask a simple question, "Why did you say that?" Suddenly you're in a maze of half-formed analogies, fragmented thoughts, and philosophical detours. Well, if you look at it through the lens of reactive emotionality and consider the broader implications of context versus perception, by the time they're done, you've forgotten what you were even upset about, and they know it. Word salad doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to sound smart enough that you start feeling stupid. You question your own comprehension, your memory, your right to even be upset. You go quiet, not because they answered you, but because you feel outmatched, overwhelmed, shut down. It's especially cruel because it poses as engagement. They'll accuse you of not listening, of always needing things black and white, of not being able to handle nuance. But there is no nuance, just confusion wrapped in ego. They keep talking, layering words on top of words, until you're buried beneath them. And when you push back, they say, "I'm just trying to have an adult conversation," but it's not a conversation. It's a trap, a verbal fog that clouds your instincts, derails your truth, and keeps them safely untouched behind a wall of meaningless, impressive-sounding nothing. Over-explaining. Over-explaining is the psychological trap that turns your voice into a defense mechanism, where you talk not to express yourself, but to earn the right to be heard. It feels like clarity, but it's actually submission, because behind every overly detailed explanation lies fear. Fear of being misunderstood, blamed, or rejected. And manipulators know how to weaponize that fear until you're constantly justifying your every move. They say, "That doesn't make sense," or "Why would you do it that way?" And suddenly, you're unraveling your thought process, your intentions, your past decisions, desperate to prove that you're reasonable. But the more you explain, the more power you give them, because now the conversation isn't about what happened, it's about whether you are acceptable. Over-explaining shifts the emotional burden. It makes you feel responsible for their misunderstanding, responsible for their reaction. And so, you keep talking. You soften your words, add disclaimers, make yourself smaller and smaller in the hope they'll finally say, "Okay, I get it." But they never do, because they're not confused. They're in control. This tactic thrives in toxic relationships, manipulative workplaces, and gaslighting dynamics. It creates a power imbalance where one person is calm, cold, and skeptical, and the other is bending over backward to sound rational, kind, and safe. And the more you try to explain yourself, the more they subtly suggest you have something to justify. You start questioning your actions, then your judgment, then yourself. Over-explaining doesn't earn peace. It trades your self-trust for temporary approval. And by the time you realize it, you've talked yourself into a corner, while they quietly watch you tighten the ropes. False choices. False choices are the illusion of freedom, a psychological trap that frames two or more options as if they represent your will, when in reality, Every path leads exactly where the manipulator wants. It's not about offering decisions, it's about designing them carefully, strategically, so no matter what you choose, they still win, and you still believe it was your decision. They say, "Do you want to talk about this now or after you've calmed down?" Either way, you're the irrational one. Do you want to stay and work on this or walk away like you always do? Both roads point to shame. Do you want to admit you overreacted or keep making things worse? There's no real option here, just a corner disguised as a conversation. False choices work because humans crave autonomy. We want to feel in control of our decisions, even in conflict. But when the choices are rigged, we're not being respected, we're being steered. We end up choosing the lesser punishment, not the actual solution. And in doing so, we validate the manipulator's framing without even realizing it. This tactic isn't about resolving a situation, it's about controlling the narrative. Every answer you give becomes ammunition for their version of the truth. You chose this, you agreed, you complied, and when you push back later, they throw your own decision in your face. You didn't choose freely, you chose under pressure, with no real third option. No space for your voice, and the more often it happens, the more you start believing that every choice you're given is fair, when in fact, it was never yours to begin with. Invalidation. Invalidation is the psychological act of dismissing, minimizing, or mocking someone's feelings, experiences, or needs until they begin to question whether those feelings were ever real to begin with. It's not a loud rejection, it's subtle, sharp, and insidious. It doesn't say, "You're wrong." It says, "You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. That didn't happen like you think." The manipulator doesn't have to shout or insult. A smirk, a sigh, a condescending laugh can carry the same weight as a slap. You say you're hurt, and they reply, "Seriously?" or "That's not a big deal." In one breath, your reality is erased, and worse, you're made to feel guilty for bringing it up at all. Invalidation is a slow poison. It trains you to bury your emotions, to second-guess your instincts, to view your vulnerability as weakness. Over time, you stop sharing how you feel, not because the pain is gone, but because you've been taught your feelings are either inconvenient or wrong, and silence becomes your only form of safety. This tactic is a favorite of emotional abusers, narcissists, and gaslighters. It isolates you inside your own experience, making you feel like the problem is you, not what's happening to you. And the more it's repeated, the deeper it cuts, until you need permission just to feel anything at all. Invalidation doesn't just erase your voice, it steals your confidence in having one. And once that voice goes quiet, the manipulator never has to silence you again, because you've already learned to silence yourself. Personal attacks. Personal attacks are the psychological sucker punch that shifts attention away from the issue and puts the target on you. They're not about solving problems. They're about disarming you, making you feel small, off balance, humiliated. And once you're defending your character instead of your point, the manipulator has already won. You bring up a valid concern, and they respond with venom disguised as insight. You're just insecure. You always play the victim. You're being irrational, like always. It's not about the facts. It's about you, your flaws, your past, your deepest sensitivities. It turns conflict into character assassination. This tactic works because it feels personal, because it is. The moment someone attacks your identity, you forget the original argument. Your energy shifts from standing your ground to proving you're not who they say you are. You try to clarify, explain, redeem yourself, while they sit back, satisfied that you're no longer a threat. Personal attacks are the emotional equivalent of pulling a fire alarm in the middle of a debate. They cause chaos, panic, shame, and suddenly you're on the defensive, not because you were wrong, but because you were targeted. And the worst part? The more you try to defend your worth, the deeper the trap. because now you're not arguing your truth. You're just begging to be seen as reasonable, stable, lovable. Exactly the reaction they wanted, because if they can make you feel broken, they never have to fix themselves. They don't want resolution. They want submission. And sometimes all it takes is one insult, whispered at the right moment, to make you forget everything you were trying to say. Emotional withholding. Emotional withholding is the psychological tactic of denying affection, attention, or emotional presence as a way to punish, manipulate, or control. It doesn't scream, slam doors, or make threats. It simply disappears. The warmth that once comforted you vanishes. The words become cold, the eyes stop seeing you, and you're left aching, not from what was said, but from what's been taken away. It starts after a disagreement, a boundary, a moment of vulnerability. You expect resolution. Instead, you get silence, detachment, a lack of acknowledgement so heavy it feels like rejection. You reach out and they pull back. You apologize, even when you're not sure what for. You try harder, speak softer, sacrifice more, just to get them to look at you like they used to. That's the trap. They've made their love conditional. Their attention becomes a reward you must earn by behaving, by pleasing, by surrendering. The more they pull away, the harder you chase. And the harder you chase, the more power they gain. Emotional withholding isn't about space. It's about punishment. It's the cold shoulder that teaches you fear, the silence that rewrites your self-worth, the withdrawal that turns love into a prize dangled just out of reach. Over time, you start anticipating their disconnection. You censor yourself to avoid triggering it. You live in a constant state of emotional hunger, grateful for crumbs, terrified of the next freeze-out. They never have to raise their voice. All they have to do is withhold what once made you feel safe, and soon you'll do anything, become anything, to feel seen again, even if it means losing yourself entirely. Appeal to pity is the psychological sleight that turns tears into a weapon, suffering into a shield, and pain into power. It's not vulnerability, it's manipulation wrapped in sadness. The moment you try to hold them accountable, they shift the spotlight to their own struggle, and suddenly you're the one who feels guilty for being hurt. They won't defend their actions. They'll collapse under them. I've just been under so much stress. You know how hard it is for me. I guess I'm just the monster again. Their voice cracks, their eyes well up, and your anger, your truth, starts to crumble under the weight of their pain. Because how can you argue with someone who's already broken? This tactic works because empathy is your weakness, and they know it. You start comforting instead of confronting. You soften your voice, ease your boundaries, backpedal your needs. The more you care, the more you retreat, and they never have to take responsibility because now they're the one who's been wounded by you. Appeal to pity thrives on imbalance. Your pain is put on hold, your voice minimized, your emotions invalidated, all in service of their narrative. You become the villain in your own story, and they become the fragile victim you can't bear to hurt further. It's emotional blackmail in soft focus, and when the tears dry, nothing changes. No resolution, no growth, just silence, guilt, and the echo of your swallowed truth. Because once you fall into their pity trap, you're no longer allowed to feel pain, only to apologize for causing theirs. Rewriting history. Rewriting history is the psychological manipulation of the past, a deliberate distortion of memories, events, and facts to reshape reality in the manipulator's favor. It's not about forgetting, it's about replacing. They don't erase what happened. They edit it, spin it, dress it in new language until the version you remember starts to feel unreliable, even delusional. You recall a fight where they screamed, but they insist you blew it out of proportion. You remember crying after something cruel they said, but they tell you you were just emotional. What was once black and white becomes foggy gray. You start asking yourself, was it really that bad? Did I misread it? Maybe I was being sensitive. Rewriting history works because memory is fragile, and manipulators know that. They repeat their version enough times that it starts to overwrite yours. They're calm, confident, convincing, and because you want to believe the best, because you value peace over being right, you give ground. You accept their version, not because you believe it, but because the emotional exhaustion of defending your truth just isn't worth it anymore. And once you accept it once, they'll do it again and again until the relationship is built not on shared experiences, but on their script, a version of the past where they're always the victim, the hero, or the one who tried. You're left questioning not just the facts, but your own ability to recall them. And when your history no longer belongs to you, neither does your voice or your power. Because how can you fight for your truth when you've been taught to forget it ever existed? Mocking or teasing is the psychological dagger dressed in a grin. It's the tactic of wrapping cruelty in humor, making you the punchline of a joke you're not allowed to react to. Don't be so sensitive. I'm just playing. You know I'm kidding, but you're not laughing. Because deep down, you know it wasn't really a joke. They tease your insecurities, your dreams, your voice, your emotions, always in front of others, or just when you've let your guard down. And when you flinch, when your smile fades, they double down with mock surprise. Wow, can't even take a joke? The message is clear. You're the problem, not them, not their words. You. Mocking works because it creates a trap. If you laugh along, you're accepting the disrespect. If you push back, you're painted as overly emotional, uptight, or humorless. Either way, they win. Either way, they stay in control, center stage, making you the spectacle. Over time, teasing erodes your self-esteem like slow poison. You start second-guessing your reactions, suppressing your sensitivity, trying harder to seem chill. You shrink yourself to avoid being the next target, to avoid being made to feel stupid, weak, dramatic. But the truth is, mocking isn't affection. Teasing isn't love. It's dominance under disguise, a way to assert superiority while keeping you unsure of your own worth. Because if they can make you laugh at your own pain, they don't have to answer for causing it. They just smile and dare you to call it what it really is: cruelty, disguised as fun. Persistent doubt. Persistent doubt is the psychological erosion of your certainty, a slow, deliberate chipping away at your confidence, instincts, and perception of reality. It's not loud or aggressive, it's quiet, insidious, a steady hum of second-guessing planted by someone who knows that once you start doubting yourself, you'll stop trusting yourself and start trusting them. It begins with simple questions. Are you sure that's how it happened? You always remember things a little differently. That doesn't sound like something I'd say. Harmless on the surface, but said enough times they don't just question the moment. They make you question you, your memory, your logic, your ability to read the room. And the more you try to defend yourself, the more unstable you feel, because their doubt isn't based in truth, it's based in control. This tactic works best when delivered with calm concern, not anger, not chaos, just subtle contradiction, delivered with a tone that says they know better, that you tend to overthink, and you begin to believe it. You start checking yourself, apologizing for things you never did, giving up ground just to avoid the sick feeling that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong. Persistent doubt isn't about proving you're crazy. It's about making you wonder. Because the moment you start looking to them for reassurance, instead of inside yourself, they own the narrative. And you become dependent, not on their love, but on their clarity. You once trusted your gut. Now you wait for their version of the truth. And when doubt becomes your new baseline, they no longer have to silence you. You do it for them, every time. False humility is the psychological disguise that cloaks arrogance, manipulation, or entitlement in soft-spoken self-deprecation. It looks like modesty. it sounds like grace. But underneath the "I'm not that special" lies a hidden demand. Notice me, praise me, feel guilty for questioning me. It's not about being humble. It's about using humility as a tool to control perception. They say, "I'm really not that great at this," right after doing something impressive, so you rush to reassure them. "I don't deserve credit," after orchestrating a success, so you give them more. They minimize their strengths, exaggerate their flaws, and deflect praise, not to reject it, but to collect it indirectly. You're pulled into their orbit by obligation. Their self-doubt becomes your responsibility to soothe. False humility is strategic. It's used to silence criticism before it's voiced. If someone says, "I know I'm not perfect," they're daring you to say otherwise. If they add, "I'm probably the worst person to ask," they're signaling they want you to ask anyway. It's a game of emotional baiting, one where they appear small so they can be treated as larger than life. The manipulation comes when you start mistaking this act for vulnerability, when you give them more slack, more grace, more credit, because how could someone so humble be dangerous? But that's the trap. Their false modesty makes them harder to challenge, harder to hold accountable, harder to see clearly. Because when someone weaponizes humility, you don't question their motives. You apologize for ever doubting them. And that's exactly what they want.